Hello there and welcome to Life Beyond Seen, where curiosity settles in quietly and long journeys unfold at an unhurried pace. Tonight, we're stepping into a place that stretches across states, across centuries, and in some ways, across the edges of human certainty. A place of ridgelines and hollows, of moss-covered stones and winding footpaths. A place that draws millions each year with promises of solitude, challenge, and beauty. And yet, it is also a place where some enter and never return. The Appalachian wilderness. It runs like a spine along the eastern United States, from Alabama all the way to Maine. Softly rounded mountains, older than the Rockies, older than many things we consider permanent. Forest layered upon forest, valleys that hold morning fog long after the sun has risen. Trails that seem gentle at first, almost welcoming, and then, sometimes, not. Before we go any further, I'm curious. Where are you listening from tonight? Are you near a city glow where streetlights hum outside your window, or somewhere quieter, perhaps not far from trees of your own? And what time is it where you are? Late evening, early morning? There's something fitting about talking about deep forest when the world around you is still. If you find this journey steady and absorbing, if you enjoy these slow explorations into places that hold more than they first reveal, consider liking the video or subscribing. It helps this quiet space reach others who enjoy thoughtful wanderings through science, history, and the edges of the unknown. Now, let's take a step forward. The Appalachian wilderness does not begin as a threat. It rarely does. Most who head into it go with excitement. They pack carefully. They check weather forecasts. They lace boots that have already walked miles. The Appalachian Trail alone stretches over 2,000 miles, clearly marked, maintained by volunteers, travelled by thousands of hikers each year. Guidebooks describe water sources, shelter locations, elevation changes. On paper, it is organised. But paper does not capture atmosphere. Walk beneath the canopy and the world shifts. Sound softens. Wind changes direction without much warning. The ground tilts in ways that don't always appear dramatic, yet steadily drain energy from your legs. Leaves absorb footsteps. Landmarks repeat themselves. Trees of similar height and bark pattern stand in quiet rows, as if placed deliberately to blur distinction. The first sensation many describe is not fear, it's scale. You look around and realise the forest extends in every direction, not for a mile, not for 5, but for dozens, hundreds. There are roads, yes, towns, ranger stations, but in the interior stretches, especially in sections of the Smokies, the Pisgah National Forest, the Monongahela, or deep portions of Maine's 100-mile wilderness, the density increases. The human world feels less immediate. It's important to understand that the Appalachian region is not a single forest. It is a complex patchwork of national parks, state lands, private property, remote hollows, managed trails, and untamed stretches. Some areas are well trafficked, others see very few boots in a season, and every year search and rescue teams are called. Most missing persons are found. Let's begin there. The majority of hikers who lose their way are located within hours or days. They are dehydrated, tired, embarrassed, sometimes mildly injured but alive. This is not a story built on constant tragedy. It is built on rare but persistent disappearance. There are cases where someone steps off a trail to relieve themselves and does not return. Cases where experienced outdoorsmen vanish within short distances of established paths. Cases where search dogs pick up a scent that simply ends. The Appalachian wilderness does not need dramatic cliffs or extreme altitude to become dangerous. Its power lies in subtlety. Consider the terrain. Unlike sharply defined mountain ranges with dramatic peaks, the Appalachians are worn down by time. Their slopes are rounded. Their ridges twist unpredictably. Valleys run deep and narrow. This creates a pattern of movement that can feel intuitive at first. You follow a ridgeline. You descend into a hollow. You climb again, but these ridges branch. They fork into secondary spines that look nearly identical to the one you meant to follow. In thick tree cover, visibility can drop to a few dozen yards. Understory plants such as rhododendron and mountain laurel form dense walls. In some sections, especially in the southern Appalachians, these thickets are so tight that hikers refer to them as green tunnels. Once inside, direction becomes difficult to maintain. Compasses can behave oddly in certain localized areas due to mineral deposits, though widespread magnetic anomalies are often overstated. More common is simple human error. A slight deviation around a fallen tree, a gradual drift while trying to avoid muddy ground, a misplaced assumption that downhill always leads towards safety. Water complicates things further. Streams crisscross the mountains. In survival advice, following water downhill is often recommended. Eventually, water leads to larger rivers, and rivers lead to civilization. But in the Appalachians, watercourses split, rejoin, disappear underground, or flow into remote valleys that are miles from roads. Following a stream can mean committing to rugged terrain with steep banks and slippery rocks. Then there is weather. The Appalachian Range creates its own microclimates. Conditions at a trailhead can differ significantly from those at elevation. Fog rolls in quickly, especially in the Smoky Mountains. Rain can begin without dramatic cloud buildup. Temperatures drop faster than expected after sunset. Hypothermia does not require snow. It requires wet clothing, wind, and time. In late autumn and early spring, the margin between manageable discomfort and medical emergency narrows. A twisted ankle 3 miles from a road becomes something else entirely if night falls and temperature drops below freezing. Yet physical environment is only part of the story. There is also the human mind. When a person realizes they are lost, a sequence begins. At first, denial. I must have missed a turn. Then problem solving. Retrace steps. Check map. Increase pace slightly. When familiar landmarks fail to reappear, heart rate rises. Breathing changes. The brain shifts into stress response. Under stress, decision-making deteriorates. People begin to hurry when slowing down would help. They commit to a direction without verifying it. They abandon dropped items that might later serve as markers. Some remove heavy gear in an attempt to move faster, inadvertently discarding survival tools. Search and rescue reports repeatedly note a common behaviour called panic walking. A lost individual continues moving in one direction for hours, often downhill, often into thicker terrain, driven by urgency rather than strategy. In controlled studies, humans without visual references tend to walk in circles. Even when instructed to move straight ahead, most gradually arc in one direction due to subtle differences in leg strength and stride length. In a dense forest without visible sun or stars, that arc becomes invisible. Imagine the psychological weight of that moment. You stop. You listen. The forest is not silent, but it is indifferent. Insects buzz. Leaves shift. A distant bird calls. None of it confirms your direction. None of it answers. Night adds another layer. When darkness settles under heavy canopy, it arrives quickly. Depth perception weakens. Familiar shapes become uncertain outlines. A tree stump becomes a crouched figure for a split second. Your own breathing sounds louder. Time stretches. It is at this point that some make choices they would not make in daylight. There are documented cases of hikers leaving established trails late in the afternoon to shortcut toward perceived landmarks. Others attempt to bushwhack back to a road rather than stay put and wait for morning. Each additional step into unfamiliar terrain reduces the probability of quick recovery. Technology offers reassurance, but it is not infallible. Cell service is inconsistent in much of the Appalachian Range. GPS units rely on batteries. Batteries fail. Phones slip from hands and shatter on rocks. A device that felt like security becomes dead weight. All of this creates a layered vulnerability. Not a single dramatic failure, but a chain of small misjudgments amplified by environment. Still, there are cases that remain difficult to categorize. Search efforts sometimes involve dozens of trained personnel, thermal imaging, canine units, helicopters. In most scenarios, signs appear: footprints, disturbed vegetation, fabric caught on a branch, but occasionally evidence thins, then stops. The terrain itself can conceal, leaf litter accumulates quickly, heavy rains erase tracks, wildlife scavenges. In steep ravines, a fall can carry someone into a crevice not visible from above. Dense undergrowth can hide a body within yards of a trail. It does not require supernatural explanation. It requires geography and time, and yet local culture carries stories. In mountain communities, tales pass down generations, stories of lights seen deep in the woods, of voices calling names, of old settlements swallowed by forest. Some are folklore shaped by isolation, some are cautionary narratives meant to discourage wandering. The human mind seeks patterns, and when answers are incomplete, stories grow to fill space. It is important not to dismiss these narratives outright, nor to accept them without scrutiny. They reflect a long relationship between people and land. The Appalachian region has been inhabited for thousands of years, first by indigenous communities who understood its rhythms intimately, then by settlers who carved farms into narrow valleys, then by coal miners, loggers, and modern hikers. Each generation learned respect, often through loss. The mountains are not actively hostile. They do not plot. They do not lure. They simply operate on scales that exceed individual plans. Erosion shapes them over millions of years. Forest succession replaces clearings within decades. Trails require constant maintenance or they vanish under growth. Time moves differently in wilderness. A boot print lasts hours. A campsite lasts days. A life lasts decades. The forest remains. That perspective can feel unsettling. It reduces individual presence to something brief. For many, that brevity is part of the appeal. To step into a landscape that does not revolve around human urgency. To feel small in a way that is grounding rather than diminishing. But that same scale is why search areas can expand so rapidly. A person capable of hiking 3 miles per hour can cover significant distance before anyone realizes they're overdue. Add terrain variability and potential direction change, and the radius multiplies. Rescue coordinators often say the first 24 hours are critical. After that, probabilities shift. Weather alters tracks, energy reserves decline, injuries worsen, and still, most who enter return. Families hike together. Solo backpackers complete entire through hikes from Georgia to Maine. Trail communities form. Laughter echoes around shelters at night. Sunlight filters through leaves in quiet gold patterns. The Appalachian wilderness is not defined solely by disappearance, but understanding why some never return requires patience. It requires looking at environment, psychology, history, and human expectation without exaggeration and without denial. We have only just stepped inside. The deeper we go, the more context appears. The age of these mountains matters. Their geology shapes their soil shapes their forests shape the experience of those who walk beneath them. To understand how people vanish here, we need to understand what this land truly is, how long it has been forming, and why its surface tells only part of the story. Long before there were hiking boots pressing into damp soil, before wooden shelters and painted trailblazers, before even the first human footsteps traced these ridgelines, the Appalachian Mountains were already old. Not old in the casual sense, not old like a century-old farmhouse leaning into a hillside, old in a geological sense that stretches beyond intuitive comprehension. The Appalachians began forming over 480 million years ago, during a time when much of what is now North America lay beneath a shallow sea. Continents collided slowly, violently, and repeatedly. Land masses that would one day become Africa and North America pressed into each other, pushing rock upward in massive folds. Mountain chains rose as tall, perhaps taller than today's Himalayas. What we see now are their remnants, erosion worked patiently for hundreds of millions of years. Wind wore down peaks, rain carved valleys, ice-shaped slopes during ancient glacial periods, though the southern Appalachians escaped the deepest glaciation that sculpted northern ranges. The sharp edges softened, the dramatic heights lowered. What remains are mountains that appear gentle compared to their younger cousins out west, yet their rounded forms hide immense age. That age matters. An old mountain range does not simply look different, it behaves differently. Its soils are deeper in some areas, thinner in others. Its slopes have settled into patterns shaped by time rather than abrupt upheaval. Valleys are narrow and winding, not because of recent tectonic drama, but because water has been carving through them for epochs. The forest that blankets these mountains today is layered atop that ancient foundation. When people describe the Appalachian wilderness as feeling timeless, they're reacting, perhaps unknowingly, to this continuity. Many ecosystems across the globe have been reset by glaciation, volcanic eruption, or desertification. The southern Appalachian region, particularly in areas like the Great Smoky Mountains, acted as a refuge during ice ages. As glaciers advanced over northern territories, plant and animal species migrated southward into these mountains, where climates remained relatively stable. Because of that stability, biodiversity flourished. The Great Smoky Mountains are often cited as one of the most biologically diverse temperate regions on Earth. Thousands of plant species thrive here. Deciduous forests dominate lower elevations, with oak, hickory, tulip poplar and maple forming dense canopies. Higher up, spruce and fir create environments that resemble northern forests hundreds of miles away. Mosses and ferns coat the forest floor. Salamanders in remarkable abundance inhabit moist creeks and leaf litter. An old forest is not merely a collection of trees, it is a network. Roots interlace underground. Fungal systems connect tree to tree in complex exchanges of nutrients. Fallen logs decay slowly, feeding insects and enriching soil. Layers of vegetation stack vertically, from canopy to understory to shrub layer to forest floor. In practical terms, this means density. In many parts of the Appalachian wilderness, especially outside heavily trafficked trails, vegetation does not thin out into open sightlines. Instead, it thickens. Rhododendron thickets can grow so densely that moving through them requires force. Mountain laurel forms nearly impenetrable walls. Young saplings cluster beneath taller trees, competing for light. This layered growth has developed over centuries of natural succession. Clear a section, and it returns. Leave a trail untended, and it fades under leaves and vines. When hikers move through such forest, they often rely on visual anchors, a distinctive rock formation, a bend in a stream, a clearing that opens briefly before closing again. But in an ecosystem shaped by age and continuity, repetition is common. One slope resembles another. One hollow mirrors the next. To step into this forest is to enter a place that has outlasted ice ages, extinctions, and human arrival. The indigenous peoples who lived here long before European settlement understood the mountains intimately. Cherokee communities, among others, inhabited vast portions of the southern Appalachians. They travelled established paths, farmed river valleys, hunted in higher elevations. For them, the land was neither mysterious nor hostile, it was home. Knowledge passed down through generations reduces uncertainty, knowing which ridges connect to which valleys, where water flows even in dry seasons, where game trails intersect human paths. That knowledge transformed a vast wilderness into a navigable landscape. When European settlers arrived, many followed indigenous routes, widening them into roads. Others carved new paths, often misjudging terrain. Early homesteads clustered in narrow valleys where soil allowed small-scale agriculture. Isolation was common. Communities formed in hollows separated by ridges that required hours of travel to cross. Even in those early days, disappearance was not unknown. Settlers travelling between distant communities sometimes failed to arrive. Harsh winters, flash floods, illness, injury, and simple navigational error could isolate a person quickly. But records from those centuries are sparse, and storytelling filled the gaps. As logging expanded in the 19th and early 20th centuries, portions of the Appalachian forest were heavily cut. Rail lines penetrated remote valleys. Timber companies harvested extensively, especially in areas like western North Carolina and eastern Tennessee. Clear-cuts altered landscapes dramatically. Yet even after such disruption, the forest returned. Second-growth forests now dominate many areas that appear ancient at first glance. But within protected regions like national parks and designated wilderness areas, patches of old growth remain. These stands contain trees several centuries old, with thick trunks and expansive root systems anchoring them to slopes that have shifted gradually over time. The resilience of this ecosystem is remarkable, but it also reinforces a certain truth. The forest absorbs. Abandoned cabins collapse and vanish beneath vines. Rusted farm equipment sinks into soil. Old roads narrow into faint depressions, visible only in winter when leaves have fallen. Cemeteries hidden deep in woods are marked by weathered stones nearly swallowed by undergrowth. For someone unfamiliar with these patterns, the forest can feel deceptive. A clearing that seems permanent may have been a pasture a century ago. A moss-covered stone wall might indicate former habitation. Yet in summer, with foliage at full density, these traces disappear from view. Geology contributes to concealment as well. The Appalachian Mountains are characterized by folded rock layers. In some sections, especially in Pennsylvania and West Virginia, ridges run in parallel lines due to these folds. Between them lie narrow valleys. In others, particularly in the Blue Ridge province, more irregular terrain dominates, with steep slopes and rugged outcrops. Rock composition varies. Sandstone, shale, limestone, granite. Each erodes differently. Some areas produce loose scree that shifts underfoot. Others form solid but slick surfaces when wet. Crevices open between boulders. Sinkholes appear in limestone regions. A fall in such terrain may not be dramatic from a distance. A misstep on damp rock, a slide down leaf-covered slope. But gravity, even on moderate inclines, can carry a body into a depression shielded from view. Because these mountains are older, they lack the towering vertical faces seen in younger ranges. Instead, danger often hides in subtle features. A steep drop concealed by brush, a narrow ravine masked by shadow, a root system exposed on a slope that gives way under weight. Water shapes the forest continuously. Streams cut channels that shift gradually. Flash floods in narrow valleys can surge unexpectedly after heavy rain upstream. During dry spells, some creeks reduce to trickles, altering familiar landmarks. In heavily forested watersheds, sound behaves differently. Flowing water can echo off slopes, creating the illusion that it lies in a different direction. Wind moving through canopy can mask subtle auditory cues. All of these elements combine into an environment shaped by time and persistence. It is not chaotic. It follows ecological principles, succession, nutrient cycling, predator-prey balance. But to someone entering briefly, without deep familiarity, patterns may not be obvious. Modern hikers often arrive with maps showing contour lines and marked trails. Those maps are accurate within their scope. They indicate elevation change, water sources, junctions, but they cannot convey density of undergrowth in midsummer. Fog is so common that the name itself reflects it. Moist air rising over mountains cools and condenses. Visibility drops. Trails marked clearly on sunny days blur into faint outlines. Imagine moving through such fog in an ecosystem that has been growing and regenerating for centuries. Each tree rooted deep into soil layered by millennia of decay. Each ridge shaped by forces long preceding human presence. The scale shifts again. You're not navigating a temporary environment. You're moving through a system that has proven its durability across epochs. That does not mean it is invincible. Climate change alters species distribution. Invasive insects, such as the hemlock woolly adelgid, devastate specific tree populations. Human impact continues. But relative to a single human lifespan, the forest operates slowly and steadily. That steadiness can be disorienting. When someone becomes lost here, they are not lost in a chaotic landscape. They are lost in an organised one whose organisation they do not yet understand. Search teams trained in wilderness navigation study these patterns carefully. They analyse topography to predict likely movement. They assess drainage patterns, assuming lost individuals often move downhill toward water. They consider path of least resistance, though in dense Appalachian forest, that path is not always obvious. Yet even with training, the sheer age and continuity of the land complicate matters. Consider leaf litter. Each autumn, millions of leaves fall, creating thick layers across forest floor. In spring and summer, these leaves compress but remain. Footprints are not preserved as they might be in sandy desert or snowy alpine environment. Disturbance blends back quickly. Heavy rain accelerates this blending. Within hours, clear tracks fade. Then there are the animals. White-tailed deer traverse slopes regularly, creating game trails that resemble human paths, but lead to feeding areas rather than trailheads. Black bears move through dense brush with surprising quiet. Wild boar root in soil. Smaller mammals scurry through undergrowth. A human following a deer trail in low light might assume it reconnects with a marked path. Instead, it may narrow and disappear. Age also influences forest soundscape. Old forests absorb noise differently than open landscapes. Thick canopy reduces wind gust intensity at ground level, but can amplify it above. Dense understory dampens footsteps. When someone calls out for help, sound may not carry far, especially in humid conditions. In such an environment, distance perception shifts. A ridge that appears close may require significant descent and ascent to reach. A valley that looks shallow may be deeper than expected. It is tempting to imagine disappearance as sudden and dramatic, but often it unfolds gradually. A missed turn, a slight deviation, a choice to push forward rather than pause. The forest does not change to trap someone. It remains as it has been, shaped by processes far older than any trail sign. Understanding the age of the Appalachian wilderness is not about romanticizing it. It is about context. These mountains have seen continents collide. They have supported ancient species migrations. They have endured logging booms and conservation movements. They have sheltered communities and swallowed structures. When someone steps into this environment, they enter a system that does not center human intention. It accommodates it, sometimes cooperates with it, but does not depend on it. That perspective can feel humbling. And as we continue deeper into how and why some never return, that humility becomes important. Because the story is not one of malevolent forces or inexplicable phenomena. It is one of interaction between human expectation and an ancient landscape whose complexity exceeds first impressions. The age of these mountains is not just a geological fact, it is an active influence on terrain, vegetation, and visibility. It shapes how trails wind. It determines how water flows. It dictates how quickly evidence fades. And when the forest closes in after someone has passed through, it is not erasing deliberately. It is simply continuing what it has always done. Stand on an overlook along the Appalachian Range and the view can seem almost gentle. Rolling ridges stretch into the distance in soft blue layers. Valleys fold between them like quiet seams. Nothing appears especially sharp or extreme. There are no towering granite walls or knife-edge peaks. From above it looks manageable. But that wide, scenic perspective is misleading. Once you step off an overlook and descend into the terrain itself, the geography begins to behave differently. The Appalachian Mountains are a masterclass in subtle disorientation. Their slopes are not dramatic enough to warn you, yet not flat enough to guide you easily. Their ridges twist, their valleys branch. Their forest cover obscures distant reference points. Getting lost here is rarely the result of a single catastrophic error. It is usually geography working patiently against human assumptions. To understand how that happens, it helps to picture the structure of the range itself. The Appalachian system is not one continuous ridge. It is a series of provinces, each with distinct terrain patterns. The Ridge and Valley Province, stretching through Pennsylvania, Maryland, Virginia, and into parts of West Virginia and Tennessee, consists of long, parallel ridges separated by narrow valleys. These ridges were formed by folded sedimentary rock layers that now create repeating patterns across the landscape. From a map, they look like ripples. On the ground, those ripples become barriers. Imagine hiking along what appears to be a straightforward ridgeline. The trail gently curves. You see another ridge running parallel in the distance. You descend slightly into a saddle, then climb again. If you leave the marked path for even a short distance, you might descend into the wrong valley. Once there, climbing back up the steep, leaf-covered slope can be exhausting. The valley floor often runs long and narrow, offering the illusion of forward progress while subtly guiding you away from your intended direction. The repetition of ridges makes orientation difficult. One ridge resembles the next. If fog rolls in, or if tree cover blocks distant views, identifying which ridge you occupy becomes challenging without careful map reading. Further south, in the Blue Ridge Province and the Smoky Mountains, the pattern changes. Here, terrain becomes more irregular. Instead of neat parallel ridges, you encounter complex networks of spurs and hollows. A spur is a smaller ridge that extends from a main ridge. Hollows are steep-sided valleys that often contain small streams. Spurs are especially deceptive. A hiker descending a spur may believe they're moving toward a main valley or road. But spurs taper unpredictably. They can split into smaller branches, each leading deeper into remote terrain. From above, a spur looks like a simple extension. From within, it feels like a main route. Hollows complicate matters further. In Appalachian terminology, a hollow is more than a valley. It is often narrow, enclosed, and steep. Sound behaves strangely inside hollows. Water may flow quietly along one side. Dense vegetation can fill the centre. Once inside, climbing out requires significant effort, especially if the sides are covered in loose leaves and exposed roots. Waterways seem like logical guides, but they are not always reliable. Streams in the Appalachians follow the path of least resistance through folded rock and soil. That path is not necessarily straight. It twists around outcrops, splits into smaller tributaries, and sometimes disappears underground for short stretches in limestone regions. Following a stream downhill may eventually lead to a larger river, but the distance can be far greater than expected. And distance in mountainous terrain is deceptive. A mile on flat ground is one thing. A mile involving descent, uneven footing, and dense undergrowth is another entirely. Fatigue sets in more quickly than hikers anticipate. As fatigue grows, navigational precision declines. Elevation changes add another layer of complexity. The Appalachian Mountains are not the tallest in North America, but they are persistent. Elevation gains and losses occur repeatedly throughout a single hike. Instead of one large climb, hikers encounter constant ups and downs. This repeated exertion drains energy gradually. By late afternoon, even experienced hikers may feel more exhausted than anticipated. Fatigue affects decision-making. A tired person is more likely to choose a shortcut, to assume they remember the route accurately, or to press on rather than pause. The forest canopy plays an enormous role in disorientation. In open terrain, distant landmarks provide orientation. A distinctive peak, a radio tower, a visible river bend. Under dense Appalachian canopy, visibility shrinks dramatically. In summer, leaves form a continuous ceiling that blocks not only distant views, but also much of the sky. Without a clear view of the sun, maintaining a consistent bearing becomes harder. Cloud cover amplifies this effect. Fog reduces visibility further, sometimes to less than 50 feet. In fog, Even familiar trails can appear unfamiliar. Blazes painted on trees become difficult to spot if lighting is diffuse. Lighting itself changes perception. In early morning and late afternoon, sunlight filters at angles that create strong shadows. These shadows can exaggerate small dips in terrain, making them appear deeper. Conversely, flat lighting on overcast days flattens the landscape visually, reducing depth cues. Then there is leaf litter. In autumn, the forest floor becomes carpeted with fallen leaves. These leaves cover roots, rocks, and small depressions. A well-defined trail can disappear beneath them. Without visible footpath indentation, hikers rely on blazes and intuition. Step off trail briefly and the forest floor may look identical in all directions. In spring, new plant growth obscures lower sections of trail. Ferns rise, grasses thicken. What was a visible corridor weeks earlier narrows. Winter offers clearer sightlines due to bare branches, but introduces its own hazards. Snow can obscure trail markers entirely. Ice forms on slopes that appear manageable but become treacherous underfoot. Orientation in such geography requires constant attention to contour lines on maps. Contour lines reveal slope steepness and direction. But reading contour lines accurately while moving through dense forest is a skill not all possess. Many hikers overestimate their navigational ability. Modern trail systems encourage a sense of security. The Appalachian Trail, for example, is marked with white blazes painted regularly along trees. Side trails are marked with different colours. Signs indicate major junctions. This infrastructure fosters confidence. However, the presence of a marked trail does not eliminate risk. It creates an expectation that the trail will always remain obvious. In reality, storms knock down trees across paths. Washouts erode sections. Maintenance schedules vary. When a trail seems unclear, hikers sometimes assume they have momentarily lost sight of it and attempt to reconnect by moving laterally. That lateral movement can drift farther than intended. Compasses help, but only when used correctly. A compass indicates direction relative to magnetic north. It does not reveal obstacles in between. Following a straight compass bearing through Appalachian terrain can mean climbing over fallen logs, pushing through brush, and navigating uneven ground. Without pacing discipline, a hiker can veer subtly off bearing while avoiding obstacles. Small angular deviations accumulate over distance. A 5-degree error maintained over a mile results in significant lateral displacement. In dense forest, that displacement may go unnoticed until a planned landmark fails to appear. Weather alters geography in real time. After heavy rain, small trickles become streams, dry creek beds fill, soil softens, slopes become slick. Rocks covered in moss turn hazardous. A familiar crossing point may become impassable, forcing detours. Flash floods in narrow valleys can occur with little warning if rainfall is heavier upstream. A hiker descending into a valley during clear skies may encounter rapidly rising water without understanding the source. Seasonal water variability complicates map interpretation. A blue line indicating a stream on a map may represent a year-round flow or a seasonal trickle. During drought conditions, some streams vanish entirely. Hikers relying on them for orientation or hydration may find only dry stones. Wildlife trails introduce false pathways. Deer, elk in certain northern sections, and other animals create consistent routes through forest. These paths sometimes resemble lightly used human trails. They may be worn just enough to appear intentional. Following one for even a short distance can lead away from established routes into feeding grounds or bedding areas. Unlike human trails, animal paths do not lead to trailheads, roads, or shelters. The topography of the Appalachians also includes numerous rock outcrops and cliffs hidden by foliage. These are rarely dramatic vertical drops visible from afar. Instead, they may present as sudden ledges partially concealed by vegetation. Approaching one from above without clear sightlines can result in unexpected dead ends requiring backtracking. Backtracking in dense forest is not always straightforward. Without deliberate markers left behind, retracing exact steps can prove difficult. Each section of forest looks remarkably similar to the last. Human spatial memory relies heavily on distinct landmarks. In uniform environments, spatial memory degrades quickly. In a forest where tree species, trunk sizes, and understory plants repeat, the brain struggles to anchor specific memories to specific locations. Combine this with mild stress, and confidence erodes. Consider also the scale of protected wilderness areas within the Appalachian Range. The Great Smoky Mountains National Park alone covers over 800 square miles. The Monongahela National Forest spans nearly 1 million acres. Maine's 100-mile wilderness stretches roughly 100 miles between towns along the Northern Appalachian Trail with limited road access. Within these areas, road networks are sparse. Once beyond a certain distance from a trailhead, reaching a road may require significant navigation skill. Maps often display trails clearly, but may underrepresent minor logging roads or faint paths that have fallen into disuse. Encountering such a path can create false reassurance. A hiker may assume it leads to civilization, only to find it fades gradually. Another geographic factor is human settlement pattern. The Appalachians historically supported small dispersed communities in valleys. Many of these communities declined during the 20th century as industries shifted and residents moved toward urban centres. Remnants of old homesteads remain scattered across remote areas. Stone chimneys stand alone. Overgrown fields flatten subtly between trees. A lost hiker encountering such remnants might believe they are close to active habitation. In reality, the nearest occupied home may be miles away. Sound in mountainous terrain further distorts perception. Voices carry unevenly across ridges. A search team calling a name from one valley may not be heard in an adjacent hollow due to intervening ridgelines blocking sound waves. Conversely, distant highway noise may travel farther than expected under certain atmospheric conditions, leading a lost person to misjudge direction. The repetition of ridges also creates visual illusions of proximity. Seeing a road cut on a distant slope does not guarantee easy access. The intervening terrain may include steep descents and climbs that lengthen travel time significantly. Time perception shifts in such geography. Movement through dense forest takes longer than expected. Each obstacle slows progress slightly. Over hours, these small delays accumulate. A hiker planning to reach a destination by dusk may find darkness arriving sooner than anticipated. Darkness transforms geography yet again. In low light, depth perception decreases. Slopes appear flatter than they are. Shadows mask depressions. Trails become harder to distinguish from surrounding ground. Without clear landmarks, maintaining a straight line at night becomes nearly impossible without precise compass use. Even experienced outdoors people can underestimate the combined effects of subtle terrain, dense vegetation, and fatigue. Most of the time, these geographic challenges are manageable. Hikers stick to marked trails, they check bearings regularly, they turn back when uncertain, but occasionally a chain of small geographic misjudgments aligns. A missed junction due to leaf cover, a descent down a spur mistaken for the main ridge, an attempt to shortcut through what appears to be a gentle slope that steepens unexpectedly. A stream followed under the assumption it leads directly to a road. None of these decisions alone guarantee disappearance. Together, in the context of an ancient, layered, repetitive landscape, they can create distance quickly. The geography of the Appalachian wilderness does not shout its danger. It whispers it in patterns, soft ridgelines that multiply, valleys that narrow without warning, vegetation that closes behind you, elevation changes that drain strength gradually, a forest floor that hides tracks within hours. Understanding this geography is essential to understanding why some never return. It is not that the land is unknowable, it is that it demands consistent attention, respect for subtlety, and awareness of how easily human perception can be misled in environments that appear gentle from a distance. And as we continue further into this exploration, the interaction between terrain and the human mind becomes even more important. Because geography alone does not cause disappearance. It interacts with expectation, stress, and the quiet confidence many bring with them when stepping beneath that endless canopy. There is a particular kind of reassurance that comes from unfolding a map. Paper crinkles open, contour lines curve neatly across the page, blue lines trace streams, dotted paths promise direction, symbols indicate shelters, campsites, road crossings. Everything appears ordered. Everything has a place. Hold that same map in the middle of dense Appalachian forest, however, and the relationship between paper and reality can begin to shift. Maps are tools. They're abstractions. They reduce three-dimensional terrain into symbols and lines that can be interpreted by a trained mind. When used carefully, they are powerful. But when misunderstood, outdated, misread, or relied upon too heavily, they can become part of the problem. It often begins with overconfidence. A hiker studies a map at home. The trail appears straightforward. A junction here, a steady climb there, a creek crossing at mile 4. Estimated hiking time calculated using average pace. The plan feels solid. On the ground, the terrain introduces friction. Contours on a map indicate elevation change, but they do not convey how that slope feels underfoot. A cluster of tightly spaced contour lines means steep terrain, yet the actual experience may involve loose soil, exposed roots, an uneven footing that's slow movement far beyond expectation. A stream marked clearly in blue might be dry during late summer. A small trail indicated by a thin line might be overgrown due to limited maintenance. Conversely, an unmarked footpath created by repeated human or animal use may appear more obvious than the official route. The first cracks in map confidence often appear when expectation and observation diverge. A hiker expects to reach a trail junction after 30 minutes. 45 minutes pass. No junction appears. The map is checked again. Distance estimates recalculated. Doubt creeps in. Time estimation in mountainous terrain is notoriously unreliable. Pace varies based on slope, pack weight, weather, and fatigue. A person accustomed to hiking on flatter ground may underestimate how much elevation gain slows them. Add dense vegetation or muddy sections and pace drops further. When the anticipated landmark does not appear, the hiker faces a decision: continue forward, assuming slight miscalculation, or turn back to confirm position. Many choose to continue. Maps depend on orientation. To use one effectively, you must align it with the terrain. This requires identifying known reference points: ridges, peaks, stream bends, trail intersections. In the Appalachian wilderness, dense canopy often obscures distant landmarks. Without a visible peak or clear valley floor, orienting a map becomes more abstract. Compasses assist in this process, but they too require skill. A compass does not reveal your position. It only indicates direction relative to magnetic north. To use it properly with a map, you must understand declination, the difference between true north and magnetic north. In many parts of the eastern United States, declination is significant enough that failing to adjust for it can result in noticeable navigational error over distance. Declination changes slowly over time. Older maps may list outdated values. Hikers unfamiliar with this concept may align their compass without correction, gradually drifting off intended bearing. Even with proper adjustment, following a bearing in dense forest is not simple. A compass provides a direction. It does not clear obstacles. Fallen trees, thick undergrowth, steep slopes, and rock outcrops force detours. Each detour introduces the risk of bearing deviation. Without disciplined correction after each obstacle, small angular errors accumulate. Paper maps themselves can introduce confusion when scale is misunderstood. Topographic maps come in various scales. A common scale is 1 to 24,000, meaning 1 inch on the map equals 24,000 inches in reality. To the untrained eye, distance between 2 points may appear short, but translating that into actual terrain can be deceptive. A half-inch gap might represent a quarter mile of steep ascent. In areas with tightly packed contour lines, elevation change is rapid, but without experience interpreting those lines, hikers may underestimate effort required. Weather complicates map use. Rain turns paper soft. Ink smudges. Wind makes unfolding and refolding cumbersome. In cold conditions, numb fingers struggle with fine motor tasks like aligning compass edges with grid lines. In fog, identifying visual reference points to confirm map alignment becomes difficult. The map shows a ridgeline extending north-south, but without clear sight of slope orientation, confirming whether you stand on that ridgeline or an adjacent spur is challenging. Digital maps and GPS devices offer additional tools, yet they introduce new vulnerabilities. Smartphones with mapping apps display real-time position using satellite signals. This feature provides powerful reassurance. A small dot indicating your location relative to trails can reduce anxiety significantly. But GPS accuracy varies. In deep valleys or under heavy canopy, signal quality degrades. The device may display position offset by dozens of meters. That discrepancy might not matter on open terrain, but in dense forest with multiple parallel paths, it can lead to confusion. Battery life becomes a limiting factor. Cold temperatures drain batteries faster. Continuous screen use accelerates depletion. A device relied upon heavily early in the hike may fail later when most needed. Over-reliance on GPS can weaken traditional navigational awareness. If hikers follow a digital arrow rather than reading terrain, they may neglect subtle cues around them. When the device fails, they find themselves less prepared to navigate without it. Another challenge arises from outdated information. Trails shift. Sections reroute due to erosion, storm damage, or land ownership changes. Printed maps may not reflect recent adjustments. Online maps vary in update frequency. A trail shown clearly might have been abandoned. A road indicated as open may have been gated. Encountering such discrepancies forces interpretation. The hiker must decide whether the map is wrong or whether they are misreading terrain. Cognitive bias often favours the assumption that the map is correct and the hiker is mistaken. This can lead to unnecessary course correction in the wrong direction. Group dynamics influence map use as well. In small hiking groups, one person often assumes the role of navigator. Others defer. If that navigator hesitates but expresses confidence outwardly, the group may continue in error. Social pressure discourages frequent stops to reevaluate position. Conversely, disagreements about direction can fracture decision-making. One person insists they recall a distinctive tree or rock formation. Another trusts the compass reading. Time passes in debate while daylight diminishes. Maps require interpretation of contour patterns to predict terrain shape. A series of U-shaped contour bends indicates a valley. V-shaped bends pointing uphill show stream direction. Spurs appear as elongated contours extending from ridges. Without practiced interpretation, these shapes remain abstract. On the ground, recognizing whether you are on a main ridge or a spur demands awareness of slope direction and water flow. In the Appalachians, slopes are often gradual enough that directional cues feel subtle. A hiker might believe they are on the primary ridgeline because the ground feels elevated. In reality, they may occupy a secondary spur descending gently into a hollow. By the time the error becomes apparent, perhaps when a major landmark fails to appear, significant distance may separate them from intended route. There's also the psychological aspect of map trust. When lost individuals are later interviewed after rescue, many describe a moment when they realized something was wrong but chose to continue briefly to confirm. That brief continuation sometimes extended far longer than intended. Maps create an expectation of control. As long as the map is present, it feels as though location can be determined with enough patience. But when terrain resists alignment with paper representation, anxiety grows. Anxiety impairs map reading. Under stress, fine details blur. Contour lines appear cluttered. The brain seeks simple answers. hikers may focus on one feature, such as a stream, while ignoring others that contradict their assumption. Nightfall further reduces map utility. Without daylight, identifying terrain features to match map contours becomes extremely difficult. A headlamp illuminates only a narrow cone. Slopes beyond that cone are indistinct. Attempting to navigate by map at night in dense forest is possible, but requires high skill and calm. Most hikers are not trained for that scenario. Then there are situations where maps offer no help at all. Off-trail travel in Appalachian wilderness often involves micro-terrain not captured at map scale. Small cliffs, boulder fields, dense thickets and eroded gullies may not appear in contour lines. A map may show a gentle slope, yet on the ground that slope contains numerous obstacles forcing deviation. In some disappearances, evidence suggests individuals intentionally left established trails. Reasons vary: seeking solitude, attempting a shortcut, exploring a perceived landmark, hunting, photographing wildlife. Once off established trail networks, reliance on general topography increases. Without clear path markers, staying oriented demands constant bearing checks and terrain analysis. If weather shifts rapidly, rain reducing visibility, fog rolling in, or darkness approaching, the ability to match terrain with map declines sharply. Consider also how maps depict water. Blue lines show streams, but they do not convey width, depth, or bank steepness. A stream may appear as a minor crossing on paper, but represent a significant barrier during high water. Attempting to cross at an unintended point can result in injury. If injury occurs while off trail, returning to a known point becomes exponentially harder. Maps do not account for human fatigue curves. Decision-making quality declines with dehydration and low blood sugar. If a hiker has underestimated food needs or delayed hydration due to misjudged water sources, cognitive function may degrade subtly before they recognize impairment. Subtle impairment affects spatial reasoning first. Interpreting contour lines accurately requires mental rotation and three-dimensional visualization. Under fatigue, these processes slow. In many Appalachian disappearances, there is no evidence of dramatic environmental catastrophe. Instead, there is suggestion of navigational breakdown compounded by environmental factors. Maps did not fail entirely. They became insufficient when interpretation faltered. Rescue teams, when searching, use maps extensively. They analyze probable travel corridors based on terrain features. They identify attraction points, such as water sources, open areas, and ridgelines where a lost person might gravitate. They understand that lost individuals often move downhill. They understand that people tend to follow path of least resistance, but predicting individual behavior remains imperfect. Sometimes, the lost person possessed a map and compass. Possession does not guarantee mastery. There is a quiet lesson here about tools and understanding. A map represents knowledge condensed into symbols. It is powerful only when paired with skill, patience, and humility. In Appalachian geography, where ridges repeat, valleys branch, canopy conceals, and weather shifts, those qualities matter deeply. When maps stop helping, it is rarely because they lied. It is because the gap between representation and lived terrain widened beyond the hiker's ability to reconcile it. In that widening gap, doubt grows, decisions accelerate, course corrections compound, and in a landscape shaped by ancient geology and dense ecology, small misalignments can become significant distances before they are recognized. As we move further into this exploration, the interaction between terrain, tools, and the human mind becomes increasingly central. Because once external references fade, whether from fog, darkness, or misplaced confidence, navigation turns inward, and the mind, under pressure, does not always behave the way we expect. There is a moment in dense forest when you stop walking, and the world feels as though it has paused with you. Not silent in the absolute sense, There are insects, perhaps a distant bird call, the faint shifting of the leaves overhead. But the kind of silence that settles in the Appalachian wilderness is not the absence of noise, it is the absence of human noise. No engines, no distant highway hum, no electrical buzz, no layered murmur of conversation drifting from unseen houses. In many sections of the Appalachian backcountry, especially once you are miles from a road, that human layer disappears completely. At first, it can feel peaceful. Then, in certain circumstances, it can feel enormous. Sound behaves differently in dense old forest. Trees absorb vibration. Leaves break up airflow. Uneven terrain interrupts straight-line travel of sound waves. In open fields or desert landscapes, a voice can carry far under the right conditions. In thick Appalachian woods, it often does not. This matters more than people realize. When someone becomes disoriented or injured, their instinct is often to call out, to shout for help, to listen for a response. But in many wooded valleys and hollows, sound travels unpredictably. It may carry up a slope but fail to cross into the next valley. It may echo in ways that distort direction. Acoustic shadow zones form naturally in mountainous terrain. A ridgeline between two hollows can block sound waves almost entirely. If a search team stands on one ridge and calls down into a valley, the person in the adjacent hollow may hear nothing. Humidity plays a role as well. Appalachian air, especially in summer, is often heavy with moisture. Moist air can alter sound propagation slightly, dampening higher frequencies. Thick vegetation adds further absorption. Leaves, branches and undergrowth scatter sound energy. Even the forest floor contributes. A thick layer of leaf litter and soft soil absorbs footsteps. A person walking through dry leaves may produce noticeable crunching sounds nearby, but at distance those sounds fade quickly. Contrast that with gravel or hard-packed dirt where footfalls carry farther. The result is an environment where auditory cues shrink. In everyday life, humans rely heavily on sound to orient themselves. We subconsciously gauge direction based on echoes, traffic noise, wind patterns, distant activity. In cities and suburbs, total silence is rare. There is always some low-level hum anchoring our awareness. Remove that hum, and perception shifts. In the Appalachian wilderness, particularly at night, the silence can feel thick, not because nothing is happening, but because human presence has withdrawn. Natural sounds occur in bursts rather than continuous streams. An owl calls once, then waits. Wind rises briefly, then stills. Between those events lies space. For someone alone and uncertain of direction, that space can amplify internal thoughts. Heartbeat becomes noticeable. Breathing seems louder. The brain, wired to detect patterns, searches for signals. There are documented cases in wilderness survival studies where individuals report auditory distortions under stress. When deprived of external input and placed under psychological strain, the brain may heighten sensitivity to small noises. A branch snapping becomes significant. A rustle in leaves feels closer than it is. At the same time, real external sounds may be misinterpreted. Wind moving across a ridge can produce low-frequency tones that resemble distant voices. Water flowing over uneven rock can mimic irregular rhythms. In heavily wooded hollows, echoes can cause a shout to seem as though it came from a different direction. For search and rescue teams, understanding forest acoustics is critical. Teams often use call and response techniques, stopping periodically to shout the missing person's name and listen. They choose high ground when possible, allowing sound to travel downward, but they know that valleys can trap or redirect sound unpredictably. Dogs, often used in searches, rely more on scent than sound, but scent dispersion is also influenced by terrain and wind patterns. In hollows where air stagnates, scent may linger. On ridges exposed to wind, it may dissipate quickly. Silence also affects time perception. Without external auditory markers, no passing cars, no distant bells or clocks, the sense of passing time can blur. In urban environments, subtle background noise marks continuity. In deep forest, minutes can feel longer or shorter depending on emotional state. A person who believes they have been calling for hours may have called for far less time. Fatigue combined with silence stretches subjective experience. Night intensifies the effect. In many parts of the Appalachian range, once the sun sets beneath thick canopy, darkness arrives fully. Without moonlight filtering through gaps, visibility drops sharply. Sound becomes primary sensory input. Nocturnal animals become more active. Coyotes howl. Insects create layered rhythms. Owls move between trees almost silently. For someone unaccustomed to forest at night, these sounds can feel amplified. The brain, primed for threat detection, interprets unfamiliar noises cautiously. But the deeper challenge is not the sudden sound. It is the absence between sounds. Imagine standing alone in a hollow at night. The air is still. You call out once. Your voice echoes briefly, then vanishes. No reply comes. You wait. Nothing. In that waiting, uncertainty grows. Silence has psychological weight. Studies in sensory deprivation environments show that humans deprived of consistent sensory input can experience heightened anxiety, distorted perception, and, in extreme cases, hallucinations. While the Appalachian forest is not a deprivation chamber, prolonged isolation combined with stress can produce similar cognitive strain. This is especially true when individuals are already fatigued or dehydrated. The mind seeks connection. In silence, it sometimes generates it. Some lost hikers report hearing their name called. Later, they realize it may have been wind. Others describe thinking they heard distant traffic or voices, only to find nothing when moving toward the sound. Acoustic illusions are not supernatural phenomena. They are the brain's attempt to interpret ambiguous stimuli. Dense forest amplifies ambiguity. Sound waves reflect off irregular surfaces, tree trunks, rocks, uneven ground, creating complex echo patterns. In narrow hollows, echoes can bounce between slopes, altering perceived direction. The Appalachian terrain, with its countless small valleys and ridges, creates thousands of microacoustic environments. One hollow may carry sound unusually well. The next may absorb it almost entirely. Weather shifts alter this further. Temperature inversions, when cooler air settles in valleys beneath warmer air above, can trap sound differently. Under certain conditions, distant highway noise may carry surprisingly far at night, while closer sounds remain muted. Wind direction changes rapidly in mountainous terrain. A breeze that carries a call uphill one moment may shift and carry it away the next. For search teams, these variables complicate coordination. Two teams separated by a ridgeline may be unable to hear each other's calls despite close proximity. For the lost individual, the inability to hear response reinforces isolation. Silence also reduces the likelihood of accidental rescue. In open terrain, someone might hear voices or machinery from a distance and move toward it. In dense Appalachian wilderness, that chance decreases. A rescue team passing within a few hundred yards in an adjacent hollow may remain unheard. This reality can feel counterintuitive. Many assume that shouting in forest will carry far. In reality, unless positioned on high ground with favourable wind, sound dissipates quickly. Then there is the psychological shift when silence becomes expected. At first, a lost individual may shout frequently. As time passes without response, shouting becomes less frequent. Energy conservation begins to dominate. The person may decide to wait quietly, hoping for approaching sound rather than expending energy producing it. If search teams rely on the missing person responding vocally, silence reduces effectiveness. Compounding this is the human tendency to conserve energy under stress. When dehydration or hunger sets in, physical exertion decreases. Shouting requires effort. Listening becomes primary strategy. But listening in dense forest often yields little clarity. The absence of auditory landmarks contributes to disorientation. In open country, distant traffic or river noise can provide directional anchor. In heavily wooded Appalachian terrain, directional sound anchors are rare. This means navigation relies almost entirely on visual and cognitive cues. If those cues are compromised by fog, darkness, or fatigue, orientation deteriorates quickly. It is not that the forest is intentionally swallowing sound. It is that its structure naturally absorbs and redirects it. Old-growth stands with thick trunks and heavy canopy are particularly effective at dampening noise. Moss-covered surfaces absorb vibration. Soft soil prevents resonance. Even rainfall behaves differently. Rain on dense canopy creates a muffled roar overhead while leaving ground-level sound muted. During heavy rain, conversation becomes difficult. Movement sounds vanish beneath water's constant patter. In such conditions, a person might not hear approaching rescuers unless very close. Silence shapes emotion as well. In cities, constant background noise can mask internal thoughts. In wilderness silence, thoughts become louder. Doubts surface. Fear gains space to expand. Yet silence is also what draws many to the Appalachian wilderness in the first place. The relief from constant stimulation. The reset that comes from stepping away from machines and schedules. That same silence, when paired with uncertainty, can shift from comforting to overwhelming. Understanding how sound behaves in this environment reveals another layer of why some are never found quickly. It is not always a matter of distance. Sometimes it is a matter of terrain between 2 points preventing sound from bridging the gap. A search party may pass within hearing range on a map, but acoustically separated by ridges and dense growth. The forest does not merely conceal visually, it alters the auditory field, and when maps stop helping and terrain grows confusing, sound often becomes the next hoped-for guide. In the Appalachian wilderness, that guide is unreliable. As we continue further, the interaction between silence, stress, and human psychology becomes even more central. Because when external signals fade, no visible landmarks, no audible response, the mind begins to fill space in ways that can either preserve survival or quietly accelerate misjudgment. No one wakes up in the morning expecting to disappear. The decision to step onto a trail is usually grounded in confidence, maybe even familiarity. Boots are tied with intention, water bottles filled, route reviewed. There is a sense of capability, of readiness. The wilderness may be respected, but it is rarely feared at the outset, and that is where psychology quietly enters the story. Because vanishing in the Appalachian wilderness is not only about terrain or weather, it is about how the human mind responds when certainty begins to erode. The first stage is subtle. You miss a turn, or you walk a little farther than expected without seeing the junction you anticipated. At first, the mind explains it away. Perhaps you misjudged distance. Perhaps the trail sign was hidden behind foliage. These are reasonable explanations. The brain prefers reasonable explanations. It is wired to maintain a sense of control. When something feels slightly off, it seeks the smallest adjustment that restores balance. Continue forward a bit longer. The junction must be close. Minutes pass. The trail narrows. A landmark you expected does not appear. Now uncertainty grows. The body responds before conscious thought catches up. Heart rate increases slightly. Muscles tighten. Breathing becomes shallower. The sympathetic nervous system activates, preparing for potential threat. This stress response evolved for immediate dangers, a predator, a sudden fall, a loud, unexpected noise. It is efficient and powerful, it sharpens focus, it increases adrenaline. But it is less helpful for slow-building navigational uncertainty. When someone realizes they might be lost, cognitive narrowing begins. This phenomenon, sometimes called tunnel vision, reduces the field of attention. The brain prioritizes immediate problem-solving at the expense of broader situational awareness. Instead of pausing calmly to reassess, many individuals begin moving more quickly. Movement feels productive. Standing still feels passive. The instinct is to regain control through action. Search and rescue professionals often describe this pattern. Lost hikers tend to continue travelling in one direction long after they suspect they should stop. This is not irrational in the moment. It feels like commitment to a plan. But under stress, decision quality degrades. The prefrontal cortex, responsible for rational planning and complex reasoning, becomes less dominant when adrenaline surges. The amygdala, associated with fear response, becomes more active. Choices become reactive rather than reflective. This shift can lead to what rescuers call panic walking. The person moves downhill, believing it will lead to safety, or follows a stream without confirming its direction relative to known features, or attempts to shortcut through unfamiliar terrain to reach what they believe is a road. Each step taken under stress can carry them farther from established routes. Another psychological factor is optimism bias. Most people believe negative outcomes are less likely to happen to them than to others. This bias is subtle and often unconscious. A hiker who has completed multiple successful trips may assume competence protects them from serious error. When signs of disorientation appear, optimism bias delays recognition of severity. I've handled worse before. It's probably just around the bend. This delay reduces the time available for corrective action while conditions are still favourable. Fatigue compounds the issue. As energy reserves drop, cognitive processing slows. Blood sugar levels influence attention and memory. Dehydration impairs concentration. A tired brain struggles to interpret contour lines or recall precise route details. Under fatigue, the mind gravitates towards simpler strategies. Follow water downhill. Keep moving forward. Avoid backtracking because it feels like wasted effort. The sunk cost fallacy plays a role here. If someone has already walked a mile in what may be the wrong direction, turning back means admitting that mile did not bring them closer to safety. Humans are naturally resistant to acknowledging wasted effort. Continuing forward feels like preserving progress. But in wilderness navigation, turning back early is often the most effective choice. Isolation adds psychological strain. In group settings, individuals can share decision-making. Even if disagreement occurs, discussion broadens perspective. Questions repeat. Did I pass that tree 100 feet away? 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 Did I pass that tree 100? Questions repeat. Did I pass that tree before? Was the stream on my left or right? Memory under stress becomes less reliable. The brain may confabulate, filling gaps with plausible but inaccurate details. Memory is not a perfect recording device. It reconstructs events each time they are recalled. Under anxiety, those reconstructions can distort subtly. A person may vividly remember crossing a specific ridge when in fact they only imagined doing so. Nightfall introduces a further psychological shift. Darkness limits visual input, increasing reliance on imagination. Shadows move, shapes blur. The brain, wired to detect threats, may interpret ambiguous stimuli as danger. Fear accelerates decision-making. Under intense fear, some individuals attempt bold actions they would avoid in daylight, descending steep slopes rapidly, pushing through dense brush without caution, crossing unstable terrain. Conversely, others may freeze. The freeze response is less disgust than fight or flight, but it is common. Faced with overwhelming uncertainty, a person may become temporarily unable to decide on a course of action. They sit waiting for clarity that does not arrive. Time passes during this indecision. Temperature drops. Energy drains. There is also the phenomenon of goal fixation. Once a person decides on a target, reach the road, follow the stream, climb the ridge, they may ignore contradictory evidence. Confirmation bias filters perception. A slight clearing ahead reinforces belief they are on the right path. Evidence of deviation is dismissed. Goal fixation under stress can lead individuals deeper into remote terrain. Another important psychological element is perceived proximity to safety. In the Appalachians, signs of human presence, an old fence line, a rusted can, a faint path, may suggest nearby habitation. The person may feel close to rescue and press forward aggressively. In reality, those signs could be decades old. Settlement patterns shifted long ago. The nearest occupied structure may be miles away. Hope can be both protective and misleading. Maintaining hope sustains effort. It prevents despair. But unrealistic hope may prevent necessary adjustments, such as stopping movement and waiting for daylight or rescue teams. As dehydration and hunger intensify, cognition continues to decline. Studies in wilderness survival scenarios show that even mild dehydration impairs working memory and spatial reasoning. Individuals may struggle to calculate distances or recall sequence of turns. At advanced stages, confusion sets in. Individuals may remove clothing despite cold, a phenomenon observed in hypothermia cases. Judgment deteriorates to the point of irrational behavior. It's important to note that not all disappearances involve such extremes. Many cases likely involve injury rather than prolonged psychological breakdown, a fall resulting in unconsciousness, a broken limb preventing movement. But in scenarios where individuals remain mobile for hours or days, psychology becomes central. The brain under stress is not an enemy. It evolved to protect, but it evolved in environments where threats were immediate and visible. Navigational uncertainty in dense forest is a slow-burning threat. It does not trigger clear fight or flight responses initially. It produces a creeping anxiety that distorts decision-making subtly. Search and rescue training emphasizes a simple principle: stop, think, observe, plan. Stopping interrupts panic walking. Thinking re-engages rational processing. Observing broadens awareness. Planning restores structured decision-making. Yet implementing this principle requires discipline precisely when discipline feels hardest. In interviews after rescue, survivors often describe a turning point. The moment they sat down, drank water, and forced themselves to breathe slowly. In those moments, clarity sometimes returned. They retraced steps. They located a known feature. They waited for daylight. Those who did not experience that turning point may have continued moving. There is also the powerful human aversion to admitting vulnerability. Some hikers hesitate to use emergency whistles or personal locator beacons early, fearing embarrassment if the situation resolves quickly. They may delay activating rescue resources until conditions worsen. This hesitation reduces margin for error. Social identity influences psychology as well. An experienced outdoors person may feel pressure to maintain competence. The idea of becoming lost conflicts with self-image. That internal conflict can delay corrective action. On the other end, a novice hiker may underestimate risk entirely, assuming that marked trails guarantee safety. Both overconfidence and underestimation create openings for psychological missteps. Even after rescue begins, psychology continues to matter. If a lost individual hears distant shouts but misjudges direction, they may move away rather than toward rescuers. If they feel ashamed, they may remain silent temporarily, assuming searchers are not nearby. In rare cases, individuals intentionally withdraw deeper into wilderness due to personal crises. Those cases differ fundamentally from accidental disappearance, but they remind us that psychology can shape trajectory long before terrain does. Vanishing, in most Appalachian cases, is not instantaneous. It is a progression, a slight navigational error, a delayed correction, stress-induced decision, fatigue, repeated small miscalculations. The forest does not need to act dramatically. The mind does much of the work. Understanding this is not about blaming the lost. It is about recognizing how human cognition behaves under layered stresses, terrain complexity, silence, isolation, fading daylight. The psychology of vanishing is quiet. It unfolds internally long before search parties mobilize. And as we move further into this exploration, the interaction between environment and cognition will continue to reveal how easily a confident walk beneath the canopy can become something else entirely, even without a single catastrophic event. There is a quiet assumption most hikers carry with them when they step onto a marked trail. The assumption is that the trail is fixed. It may wind, it may climb or descend, it may narrow and widen. But at its core, it feels stable. It feels like a line that exists independent of weather, season, or time. Painted blazes on trees confirm it. Signs at junctions reinforce it. Footprints in soil suggest continuity. In the Appalachian wilderness, that sense of permanence is an illusion. Trails are not static features carved into stone. They are maintained corridors cut through living systems, and living systems change constantly. A trail exists because people repeatedly walk the same path and because volunteers and park crews clear it. Without that repeated reinforcement, the forest reclaims it. It does not do so aggressively. It does so patiently. Leaves fall each autumn and blanket the tread. Seeds sprout in disturbed soil. Saplings rise along edges. Storms drop branches across the route. Rains carve shallow channels where boots once pressed firmly. A trail that is clear in spring may narrow by late summer. A trail that is obvious after maintenance may become faint months later in less trafficked sections. In heavily travelled stretches of the Appalachian Trail, this change is minimal because traffic is constant, but in remote side trails, connector routes, or lesser used paths, the shift can be noticeable within a single season. Then there are reroutes. Erosion is a constant challenge in mountainous terrain. Water flowing downhill follows the path of least resistance. If a trail is poorly angled relative to slope, rainwater will carve into it, deepening the tread and washing soil away. To prevent this, trail maintainers sometimes reroute sections. They cut a new path with better drainage and close the old one. Signs may be updated, blazes repainted. But old trail beds do not vanish overnight. They remain as faint depressions in the soil lined with worn roots and occasional fragments of paint on trees. A hiker who drifts onto one of these abandoned segments may follow it confidently for several hundred yards before realizing it does not reconnect. At that moment, confusion begins. Markers themselves fade. Blazes, those rectangular paint marks on tree trunks, are subject to weather. Sunlight bleaches them. Bark grows and stretches, cracking the paint. Moss and lichen spread over surfaces, obscuring visibility. In winter, when leaves fall and sightlines open, blazes may be easier to spot. In summer, dense foliage can hide them entirely if you're not directly facing the marked tree. Distance between blazes varies depending on terrain. In clear, straight sections, they may be spaced far apart. On sharp turns, they are closer. But if a hiker misses a turn and continues straight, they may walk several minutes before noticing the absence of fresh markers. That realization often triggers doubt. Did I simply not see the last blaze? Or have I drifted off course? In some areas, multiple trail systems intersect. Horse trails, logging roads, unofficial social trails created by repeated human movement. All can resemble the intended route. Social trails are particularly deceptive. These form when hikers repeatedly take a shortcut around mud or create side paths to scenic overlooks. Over time, they can become nearly as worn as the official trail. Without careful attention to blaze colour and placement, a hiker can follow a social trail that eventually dissipates. Logging roads add another layer of complexity. Throughout the Appalachian region, especially in national forests, old logging roads remain from early 20th century timber operations. Some are wide and obvious. Others have narrowed with time, bordered by young trees but still visible as level corridors. Maps may not show all of these roads. Some are on older maps but not newer ones. Encountering one can feel like discovering a reliable exit route. It is broad, it looks purposeful, but many logging roads end abruptly or loop back into forest without connecting to public roads. Seasonal growth transforms trail appearance dramatically. In early spring, before full leaf out, sunlight reaches the forest floor more easily. Trails appear brighter. Understory plants have not yet grown tall. By midsummer, that same trail can feel enclosed. Ferns lean inward. Rhododendron branches arch overhead. The corridor narrows visually, even if the tread remains the same width. This visual narrowing can make hikers feel slightly off balance, even if they are technically still en route. Heavy storms reshape terrain quickly. A single strong wind event can topple large trees across trails. In remote sections, these blowdowns may remain for weeks before crews clear them. Hikers must climb over or detour around. Repeated detours around obstacles gradually widen trails unpredictably. What was once a single clear path becomes a cluster of parallel tracks weaving through undergrowth. Selecting the correct one is not always straightforward. Flooding also alters markers. In valleys with stream crossings, high water can wash away cairns, small rock piles used to mark direction. Wooden signs near water may rot faster due to moisture. Bridges deteriorate. Some are removed intentionally for safety. A crossing that once felt secure may become a decision point requiring careful evaluation. Snow and ice create temporary trail shifts. In winter, hikers may follow packed snow created by previous travellers rather than the official tread beneath. When snow melts unevenly, these packed tracks can lead slightly off route. Footprints in fresh snow can mislead as well. If someone ahead of you wandered briefly before correcting course, their prints may appear convincing. The Appalachian landscape also includes balds, open grassy mountaintops with few trees. These areas are beautiful and expansive, but they lack clear visual markers when fog rolls in. On a clear day, cairns or posts mark the path across a bald. In fog, those markers may disappear from view within yards. Without visible tree blazes, orientation relies entirely on careful bearing and memory. Some balds have multiple faint tracks created by grazing animals or wandering hikers. Choosing the wrong one in low visibility can lead off the intended route. In remote main sections of the Appalachian Trail, boggy terrain introduces further complications. Boardwalks cross wetlands. When boards rot or sink, detours form around them. These detours can become muddy and confusing, with multiple footprints in different directions. Even in well-maintained parks, signs are not immune to vandalism or damage. A sign twisted by wind may point inaccurately. A missing directional arrow can create hesitation. In rare cases, prank alterations have misled hikers. More often, signs simply weather and fade. There is also the phenomenon of expectation bias when following trails. If a hiker expects a trail to turn left at a certain point, they may unconsciously search for a leftward opening and miss a subtle right-hand turn marked by a blaze slightly behind their field of vision. Human attention is selective. When tired, it narrows further. In some disappearances, evidence suggests individuals stepped off trail intentionally for a brief reason, relieving themselves, taking a photograph, exploring a short distance to a viewpoint. They assumed rejoining the trail would be simple. In dense Appalachian forest, stepping even 30 or 40 yards off trail can remove visual connection entirely. Turn around once or twice, and orientation blurs. Returning to trail requires retracing precise steps. Without deliberate marking or strong memory anchors, the forest looks uniform. Markers fade, trails shift, vegetation closes. This does not mean Appalachian trails are inherently unsafe. Millions navigate them successfully each year, but it means that the stability many assume is maintained through continuous human effort. Remove that effort briefly in remote areas, and the forest resumes its slow reorganization. There is something important here about perception. A trail feels like infrastructure. It feels engineered and permanent, but it is in many ways a suggestion layered onto living terrain. When someone becomes lost due to trail confusion, it is rarely because the trail vanished dramatically. It is because subtle changes accumulated unnoticed. A faded blaze missed. A blow-down detour extended too far. An old logging road mistaken for continuation. A social trail followed beyond its usefulness. Each step made sense in isolation, but combined, they created distance. Search teams investigating trail-related disappearances often look for last confirmed sighting points. From there, they analyse possible deviations, places where an individual might reasonably have left the official path. They study terrain around those junctions, spurs, hollows, water sources. But when trails themselves appear less distinct than expected, defining that last known point becomes harder. A hiker who believed they were on official route may have been on an abandoned spur for some time before realising it. In a forest that grows continuously, maintenance is the difference between clarity and ambiguity. And ambiguity is fertile ground for misjudgment. As we continue deeper into the dynamics of disappearance, the theme remains consistent. It is rarely one dramatic failure. It is accumulation, terrain that shifts slowly, markers that fade gradually, confidence that lingers slightly too long. In the Appalachian wilderness, the path forward exists, but it requires attention not only to where your feet are placed, but to how easily that path can soften beneath leaves and return to being just another stretch of forest floor. If you spend enough time in the Appalachian wilderness, you begin to notice something about the weather. It does not announce itself dramatically. There are no towering desert dust walls visible from miles away, no sudden wall of black sky rolling in with cinematic warning. More often, it shifts quietly. A subtle cooling of air, a change in scent, a slight increase in wind that feels almost refreshing at first. And then, not long after, conditions are different. The Appalachian Range creates its own atmospheric patterns. The mountains are not tall enough to produce the kind of extreme alpine weather found in the Rockies, but they are tall enough and numerous enough to shape localized systems that behave unpredictably across short distances. This is particularly true in the southern Appalachians, where warm, moisture-laden air from the Gulf of Mexico frequently collides with cooler air masses moving down from the north. When that moist air is forced upward by mountain slopes, it cools and condenses rapidly. Clouds form, fog settles, rain begins. Sometimes this entire sequence unfolds in less than an hour. A hiker may leave a trailhead under clear blue sky. Forecast checked. No storms predicted in the immediate window. Yet weather forecasts are generalized over broad areas. They cannot always capture microclimate variation across ridges and valleys. The Great Smoky Mountains, for example, are named for the persistent mist that clings to their slopes. That mist is not mystical. It is the result of humidity interacting with elevation. At higher altitudes, temperatures are lower, air cools as it rises, condensation follows. A ridgeline that is sunny at noon can be enveloped in thick fog by mid-afternoon. Fog reduces visibility dramatically. In dense forest where sight lines are already limited, fog compresses perception further. A blaze on a tree that would be visible from 30 yards may vanish into grey. A trail that gently curves ahead may dissolve into indistinct ground. Orientation becomes harder not because the terrain has changed, but because visual confirmation of direction has faded. Rain compounds this. Appalachian soils, especially in forested slopes, can become slick quickly. Leaves on the ground act like layered parchment when wet. Roots that were manageable under dry conditions turn slippery. Rocks coated in moss become treacherous. A minor misstep on damp rock can lead to a twisted ankle. A slide down a muddy incline can carry someone farther than expected. Rain also alters water levels. Small creeks that were easily crossed in the morning may swell by afternoon. What looked like a shallow step across stream can become a knee-deep current after sustained rainfall upstream. Because watersheds in the Appalachians are often narrow and steep, runoff accelerates rapidly. Flash flooding is not confined to desert environments. In mountain hollows, heavy rainfall miles away can funnel through constricted channels with surprising speed. A hiker descending into a valley late in the day may encounter rising water without having witnessed the rain that caused it. Temperature shifts add another layer of risk. In mountainous terrain, temperature decreases with elevation, approximately 3 to 5 degrees Fahrenheit for every 1,000 feet gained. That drop may not seem significant at first, but if someone climbs from a valley at 1,000 feet to a ridge at 4,000 feet, the temperature difference can approach 15 degrees or more. Combine that with wind, and the effect intensifies. Wind exposure increases heat loss dramatically. On exposed ridges, wind speeds are often higher than in sheltered valleys. A hiker who felt comfortably warm while climbing may begin to chill quickly when pausing on an open crest. If rain accompanies that wind, clothing saturation accelerates heat loss further. Hypothermia does not require freezing temperatures. It requires sustained heat loss, exceeding heat production. Wet clothing, wind, and fatigue can create hypothermic conditions in temperatures well above freezing. Many lost hikers underestimate this. They assume that because it is spring or early autumn, the risk is minimal. But if someone becomes disoriented and continues moving through rain without adequate insulation, core temperature can drop gradually. As core temperature drops, cognitive function declines. Early hypothermia impairs judgment subtly. Individuals may struggle to make clear decisions. Speech may become slightly slurred. Coordination decreases. In moderate hypothermia, apathy sets in. The person may stop trying to correct course. They may sit down to rest and feel unusually calm. That calm is dangerous. Weather turning without warning means that a situation manageable under clear skies can escalate rapidly under precipitation and wind. Lightning presents another hazard. Thunderstorms in the Appalachians often form in the afternoon during warmer months. Moist air rises, cumulonimbus clouds build, and storms discharge electricity unpredictably. On exposed ridgelines or balds, hikers are at increased risk during lightning events. The instinct may be to descend quickly to lower ground, but rapid descent on wet slopes increases fall risk. Waiting out a storm beneath tall trees carries its own danger, as trees are common lightning targets. Snow in shoulder seasons, late autumn and early spring, can arrive unexpectedly at higher elevations. A forecast calling for cold rain at lower elevations may translate into snow on ridges above 4,000 feet. A light accumulation may not seem severe, but it can obscure trail markers and footprints. Fresh snow also masks hazards beneath. Roots, rocks, and depressions become hidden. A misjudged step can lead to injury. Then there is the matter of duration. Weather in the Appalachian range often moves in waves. A brief shower may pass quickly, but frontal systems can stall, bringing sustained rain for days. If someone is already disoriented, extended precipitation reduces visibility and erodes morale. Everything becomes damp. Fire starting becomes difficult. Clothing fails to dry. Shelter becomes critical. Without proper gear, exposure risk rises sharply under prolonged wet conditions. Wind patterns in mountainous terrain are rarely linear. Air funnels through gaps in ridges, creating sudden gusts. In narrow valleys, wind may swirl unpredictably. On one slope, air feels still. On the next, it presses firmly against your body. These micro-wind shifts affect not only comfort, but also sound and scent dispersion. For search teams, weather can delay operations. Helicopters cannot fly safely in dense fog or high winds. Search dogs are less effective in heavy rain, as scent trails wash away. Time lost due to weather can widen the gap between disappearance and rescue. There is also the psychological impact of rapidly changing conditions. A clear morning builds confidence. A sudden storm disrupts it. When weather shifts unexpectedly, hikers may rush decisions. They may attempt to push toward a destination quickly to avoid getting caught in rain, inadvertently increasing navigational error. Or they may seek immediate shelter off trail, stepping into terrain more difficult to navigate later. Weather alters terrain in real time. A trail that was firm becomes muddy. A creek that was shallow becomes impassable. A clear view becomes opaque with fog. These changes reduce the reliability of prior mental maps. Imagine someone already slightly uncertain of their position. Fog rolls in. Rain begins. Wind picks up. The landscape, already repetitive in its ridges and hollows, loses contrast. Under those conditions, even experienced hikers can feel momentarily unmoored. The Appalachian Range does not produce constant extreme weather, but its subtle variability, combined with elevation differences and moisture patterns, creates a landscape where conditions can pivot quickly. Forecasts are helpful. Preparation mitigates risk, but unpredictability remains. Search and rescue analyses often include weather as a contributing factor in disappearances, not always as the sole cause, but as a multiplier. A small navigational error under stable conditions might be corrected easily. The same error under dense fog and rain may compound. Weather that turns without warning narrows margin for correction, and when combined with fatigue, fading daylight and psychological strain, it can push a manageable situation into something far more serious before the individual fully realizes the shift. As we continue, the layers keep building. Terrain shapes movement. Trails shift and fade. Sound behaves unpredictably. The mind responds under stress. And weather, quiet at first, can tip the balance at precisely the wrong moment. In the Appalachian wilderness, change is constant. It does not always announce itself loudly. Often it arrives as a subtle shift in air, a cooling breeze, a gathering grey overhead. By the time its full effect is felt, decisions have already been made. Long before modern hiking boots pressed into Appalachian soil, before trail registers and GPS devices and search helicopters, people went missing in these mountains. Not often, not constantly, but often enough that stories accumulated. To understand disappearance in the Appalachian wilderness, it helps to step back from modern search and rescue operations and consider the long timeline of human presence here. These mountains have been inhabited, travelled, and worked for thousands of years. The context of vanishing stretches far beyond recent headlines. Indigenous communities lived across the Appalachian region long before European settlement. The Cherokee in the southern mountains, the Shawnee in parts of the central Appalachians, and many other groups developed intimate knowledge of terrain. They established trade routes, hunting grounds, and seasonal migration patterns that aligned with the rhythms of the land. Within those communities, disappearance was rare because knowledge was shared. Trails were known, water sources memorized, valleys mapped not on paper, but in memory passed between generations. When someone failed to return from a hunt, the response was organized and immediate. The land was understood not as an abstract wilderness, but as a lived environment with named features and relational meaning. European settlers entering the Appalachians in the 18th and 19th centuries did not possess that depth of generational knowledge. They followed river valleys and existing indigenous paths when possible, establishing small farms in narrow hollows and along creeks. These early settlements were isolated by modern standards. A family might live miles from its nearest neighbour, separated by ridgelines that required hours to cross. Travel between communities was often done on foot or horseback along rough paths. Weather, injury, or simple miscalculation could leave someone stranded. Historical records from frontier communities occasionally mention individuals who set out between settlements and never arrived. Sometimes the cause was likely injury or exposure, sometimes foul play, sometimes the mountains themselves. Documentation from that period is incomplete. Many disappearances were not recorded in formal archives. Instead, they lingered in oral tradition. As the 19th century progressed, industries moved into the mountains. Logging operations expanded aggressively in the late 1800s and early 1900s. Timber companies cut rail lines deep into remote valleys. Workers lived in temporary camps far from established towns. Logging was dangerous work. Accidents were common. Some workers died in clear documented incidents. Trees falling unpredictably, equipment failures, illness spreading through camps. But occasionally a worker would fail to return from a task in the woods. In dense forest, locating someone without modern communication tools was difficult. Search efforts were often limited by manpower and daylight. Mining communities in the central Appalachians faced similar challenges. Coal towns sprang up along narrow valleys. Miners worked underground in hazardous conditions. While many fatalities occurred within mines and were documented as such, travel to and from remote mining areas sometimes involved long treks across ridges. Disappearances in that era were frequently attributed to accident, but evidence was not always recoverable. By the early 20th century, as conservation efforts began creating national forests and parks, recreational use of the Appalachian wilderness increased. The establishment of the Appalachian Trail in the 1920s and 1930s formalized long-distance hiking across the range. With increased recreational traffic came more recorded incidents of hikers failing to return. It is important to emphasize that the vast majority of Appalachian trail hikers complete their journey safely. Millions of visitors enter Appalachian parks and forests each year without incident. But across decades, a small number have vanished. Some cases gained regional attention. A hiker whose car remained parked at a trailhead for days. A backpack discovered abandoned near a stream. A campsite found intact with no obvious sign of struggle. Search operations evolved over time. In earlier decades, efforts relied heavily on local volunteers and basic grid searches. Dogs were used, but technology was limited. Communication between teams was slower. As the 20th century progressed, organized search and rescue units formed. Radio communication improved coordination. Helicopters provided aerial reconnaissance. Thermal imaging technology later enhanced detection capabilities. Despite these advances, certain cases remained unresolved. In some instances, remains were discovered years later in areas previously searched. Dense vegetation and leaf litter concealed evidence until chance revealed it. In other cases, no remains were found. Patterns emerged in retrospective analysis. Many disappearances occurred near established trails. Some involved experienced outdoors people, others involved novices. Some individuals left marked paths intentionally for brief reasons, bathroom breaks, photography, short explorations, and failed to return. In other cases, individuals were last seen hiking alone without known deviation. The Appalachian region's terrain complicates recovery. Steep slopes with thick undergrowth can conceal a body from view, even during organized searches. Ravines and rock crevices create hidden spaces. Seasonal vegetation growth obscures sightlines during summer months. Heavy rainfall can redistribute soil and leaf litter over time, further masking remains. Wildlife activity accelerates decomposition and dispersal. These environmental realities explain some unresolved cases without invoking extraordinary explanations. Yet the long history of disappearance has fed cultural narratives. In mountain communities, stories circulate about individuals who went into the woods and never came back. Some stories are grounded in documented events, others are shaped by retelling over generations. Folklore emerges in spaces where answers are incomplete. Tales of mysterious lights in valleys, whispers in hollows, unexplained sounds at night. While such stories are part of Appalachian cultural heritage, they reflect human attempts to interpret uncertainty rather than evidence of supernatural cause. There is also the history of migration and displacement. During the Great Depression and the creation of certain national parks, families were relocated from mountain homes, cemeteries were left behind, old roads faded, knowledge of specific hollows and routes disappeared as communities dispersed. As generational familiarity with particular micro-regions diminished, so did intuitive navigation capacity. Modern hikers often enter areas that were once known intimately by local families, but are now treated as recreational backcountry. Disappearance, when it occurs, feels sudden to contemporary observers, but it exists within this long timeline of human interaction with Appalachian terrain. Another historical factor is communication delay. In earlier eras, if someone left home for a multi-day trip and failed to return precisely on schedule, concern might not arise immediately. Delayed reporting reduced early search effectiveness. Even in recent decades, solo hikers sometimes leave minimal itinerary information with friends or family. If someone is not expected back for several days, discovery of absence may occur late. Time is a critical factor in wilderness search. As decades passed, record-keeping improved. National park systems began documenting missing person reports more systematically. Media coverage expanded. Still, the number of disappearances remains small relative to total visitation. That proportion matters. The Appalachian wilderness is not a landscape of constant vanishing. It is a heavily visited and widely loved region where millions hike, camp, fish, and explore safely. The cases that remain unresolved stand out precisely because they are rare. Looking across history, certain consistent elements appear: terrain complexity, solo travel, unexpected weather shifts, minor navigational errors, injury, delayed reporting. In some older cases, the absence of modern tracking technology meant that once someone stepped beyond visible path, tracing their movement was nearly impossible. Today, even with GPS devices and satellite communication tools available, individuals sometimes choose not to carry them, or devices fail. The long history of those who disappeared reveals not a pattern of inexplicable phenomena, but a pattern of human vulnerability interacting with persistent geography. It also reveals the emotional weight such cases carry for families and communities. Search efforts often mobilize volunteers from surrounding towns. Flyers are posted, trailheads monitored, hopes rise and fall with each lead. When searches conclude without resolution, uncertainty lingers. In some cases, remains are discovered years later by hikers or hunters in areas that seemed inaccessible or unlikely. These discoveries remind us how easily dense forests can conceal, even in regions that feel well travelled. Historical perspective tempers sensationalism. Appalachian disappearances do not form a singular, mysterious narrative. They are individual stories separated by decades, terrain types, personal decisions, and environmental conditions. Yet the mountains connect them. From early frontier travel to modern backpacking, the risk has always been present at the margins. Most who enter return with stories of beauty and challenge. A few become part of a quieter history, understanding that history helps ground present discussion. It shifts focus away from myth and toward context, toward the interaction between ancient terrain and evolving human behaviour. The mountains have remained largely consistent across centuries. Human technology has advanced dramatically, and still, in rare cases, someone steps into the forest and does not step back out. As we move further into this exploration, the emphasis remains not on fear, but on understanding, because history shows that disappearance in the Appalachian wilderness is neither common nor magical. It is human, and it unfolds within a landscape that has been shaping human experience for far longer than any individual lifetime. Car still parked at a trailhead after car still parked at a trailhead after dark. A missed check-in call. A hiker who was supposed to return by noon but has not appeared by evening. At first, friends or family may assume delay. A slow hike, a dead phone battery, a spontaneous decision to camp an extra night. But as hours pass, uncertainty tightens. Eventually someone makes the call. From that moment forward, time changes character. Search and rescue operations in the Appalachian region are complex, coordinated efforts involving local authorities, park rangers, trained volunteers, and sometimes state or federal resources. The response varies depending on location, whether the disappearance occurred within a national park like Great Smoky Mountains National Park, a national forest such as Monongahela National Forest, or along the broader corridor of the Appalachian Trail. But across jurisdictions, one principle remains constant. The first 24 hours matter. When a report is filed, the initial step is information gathering. What was the individual's planned route? What gear were they carrying? What time were they last seen? Were they hiking alone or with others? What is their level of experience? This stage is critical because search area estimation depends heavily on those details. If a hiker left a clear itinerary with expected checkpoints, search teams can focus along that path. If the itinerary was vague, just heading into the woods for the weekend, the search radius expands rapidly. Terrain complicates estimation. An average person can walk 2 to 3 miles per hour on flat ground. In Appalachian terrain, that average drops significantly due to elevation changes and obstacles. Still, even at 1 mile per hour, a lost individual can cover substantial distance before being reported overdue. Search coordinators create what is known as a probability of area model. They consider likely movement patterns based on behaviour research. Studies show that many lost hikers tend to travel downhill, follow water, or move along path of least resistance. But behaviour is not uniform. Some people stay put when they realise they are lost. Others continue moving in one direction. Children behave differently from adults. Experienced outdoors people sometimes attempt complex self-rescue strategies that widen search zones. Once the initial plan forms, teams deploy. Ground searchers often move in structured lines, spaced at intervals to maximise visual coverage. They sweep designated grids, calling out the missing person's name periodically. Sound, as we discussed earlier, does not always carry reliably in mountainous forest, so visual scanning becomes primary. Searchers look for unnatural patterns, bright fabric against green foliage, disturbed leaf litter, broken branches, discarded items. Dogs trained in tracking or air scent detection are frequently used. Tracking dogs follow specific scent trails from last known points. Air scent dogs work differently, detecting human scent particles carried by wind. Wind direction matters immensely for canine searches. Terrain channels airflow unpredictably, making scent distribution complex. If weather has shifted significantly since disappearance, scent trails may weaken or disperse. Aerial support may be requested when available. Helicopters equipped with infrared imaging can detect heat signatures, especially effective during cooler night conditions when a human body stands out against colder surroundings. But dense canopy reduces visibility from above. In many Appalachian sections, trees are thick enough to obscure ground completely. Drones are increasingly used in modern search efforts. They can navigate lower altitudes than helicopters and provide real-time visual feeds. Still, battery life and signal range limit coverage. As hours pass without result, search areas widen. Logistics intensify. Volunteer coordination requires staging areas. Communication networks must remain clear and organised. Each searcher carries equipment, water, first aid supplies, radios. Safety of search teams becomes a factor especially in steep or unstable terrain. Night searches are possible but risky. Family members wait. That waiting period, family members wait. That waiting period is one of the most difficult aspects of search and rescue operations. Updates may be infrequent as teams focus on terrain. Rumours can spread rapidly through social media. Emotional pressure builds. Inside command centres, search leaders rely on data and discipline. They map each completed grid. They track dog team routes. They mark areas cleared and areas pending. They analyse any new evidence, a footprint, a piece of gear, a voice heard faintly by a searcher. Sometimes small clues reshape strategy. A water bottle found near a stream suggests movement downhill. A campfire ring indicates overnight survival attempt. Footprints pointing in a particular direction narrow focus. Other times, there are no clues. When days pass without discovery, the operation shifts phase. Statistically, the probability of survival decreases over time, especially if weather conditions have been harsh. But probabilities are not certainties. There are documented cases of hikers surviving extended periods by finding water and shelter. Search strategies adjust based on survival modelling. Where would a person seek shelter? Under rock overhangs, near water, on ridges to increase visibility? Teams prioritise these likely refuge areas. The Appalachian terrain introduces particular challenges in extended searches. Thick rhododendron and laurel thickets can form nearly impenetrable walls. Searchers must push through carefully, often at slow pace. Steep slopes covered in loose leaves increase fall risk for rescuers. Fatigue affects search teams as well. Rotations are necessary to maintain effectiveness. Weather may interrupt operations, fog grounding aircraft, rain reducing dog efficiency, storm warnings forcing temporary suspension. Public attention often rises during high-profile cases. Media coverage expands, tips pour in, some are useful, many are not. Search leaders must filter information carefully, balancing urgency with methodical approach. After several days, if no traces found, operations may scale down. This is one of the hardest decisions in wilderness search and rescue. Resources are finite. Volunteer energy cannot be sustained indefinitely. At some point, active search transitions to periodic monitoring and follow-up on new leads. For families, that transition can feel like a second loss. Yet even after formal searches conclude, discoveries sometimes occur months or years later. Hunters, hikers, or maintenance crews stumble upon remains in areas previously searched. Dense vegetation and shifting leaf cover can hide evidence astonishingly close to established trails. When remains are found, forensic teams attempt to reconstruct sequence of events. Location relative to trail, evidence of injury, signs of attempted shelter. Often conclusions are straightforward. Fall injury, hypothermia, medical emergency. Sometimes the exact sequence remains uncertain. What becomes clear in most cases is how quickly a manageable situation can narrow. Search and rescue teams operate under immense pressure to bridge that narrowing window. Their work is disciplined, structured, and grounded in decades of research into lost person behaviour. They know that most lost individuals are found within a short distance of last known point. They know that panic walking increases search radius. They know that early reporting improves survival odds dramatically, which leads to a quiet but important truth. Many tragedies could be mitigated by small preventive measures, leaving detailed itineraries, carrying emergency communication devices, turning back early when uncertain, activating rescue signals sooner rather than later. Search and rescue is often described as a race against time because it is. Time affects survival probability. It affects scent viability. It affects weather exposure. It affects psychological resilience of the missing individual. But time also affects terrain. Leaf litter shifts. Streams rise and fall. Vegetation grows. The Appalachian wilderness does not pause while search operations unfold. Search teams understand this deeply. They move with urgency not because the mountains are malevolent, but because they are indifferent to human timelines. In many cases, that urgency results in success. Lost hikers are located cold but alive. Injured individuals are airlifted to hospitals. Families reunite with relief and gratitude. Those outcomes rarely make national headlines because they resolve quietly. It is only when searches end without resolution that the story lingers publicly. Understanding search and rescue as a disciplined, evidence-driven process removes much of the mystique surrounding Appalachian disappearances. These are not investigations into myth. They are structured responses to environmental complexity and human vulnerability. And as we continue exploring why some never return, it becomes increasingly clear that disappearance is rarely about a single dramatic moment. It is about timing. The moment uncertainty begins, the moment correction is delayed, the moment weather shifts, the moment energy runs low. And on the other side of that equation, it is about how quickly someone notices, calls for help, and mobilizes the race against that narrowing window. Is built from previous hikes completed successfully. Nights spent camping without incident. Storms endured and navigated. Maps read accurately. Trails followed with confidence. And most of the time, experience works exactly as intended. It reduces risk. It sharpens judgment. It builds resilience. But in the Appalachian wilderness, there are rare moments when experience alone is not enough. This is not an indictment of skill. It is a reminder of scale. The mountains do not distinguish between novice and veteran. Terrain responds the same way to both. Weather shifts regardless of resume. A wet route does not adjust its grip because the boot stepping on it belongs to someone who has hiked for 20 years. Many of the most puzzling disappearances in the Appalachian region have involved individuals who were not reckless beginners. They were hunters who knew local ridges well, long-distance hikers who had completed hundreds of miles, outdoor enthusiasts comfortable with compass and contour lines. That reality unsettles people. If someone who knows what they are doing can vanish, what does that say about the rest of us? The answer lies not in diminishing experience, but in understanding its limits. Experience builds pattern recognition. A seasoned hiker learns how trails typically behave, how ridgelines flow, how weather tends to shift. But pattern recognition depends on patterns remaining within expected range. When small deviations occur, experienced individuals sometimes interpret them through the lens of familiarity rather than uncertainty. This is called overconfidence bias. It does not require arrogance. It simply arises from repeated success. If every previous navigational challenge has been solved quickly, the mind assumes this one will be too. An experienced hiker who misses a turn may think, "I've corrected worse mistakes before." Instead of stopping immediately, they continue, confident that they will identify and fix the error shortly. That confidence can delay decisive correction. There is also something known as normalization of risk. When someone spends years in wilderness environments, minor hazards become routine: slippery slopes, stream crossings, light bushwhacking. Each instance reinforces the belief that similar future situations are manageable. But environments are not identical from one day to the next. A slope crossed safely in dry conditions last year may be dangerously slick after recent rain. A familiar hollow may look slightly different after storm damage. Experience can create an illusion of familiarity even when conditions have shifted. Hunters offer a particularly revealing example. Many Appalachian hunters know specific areas intimately. They return season after season. They memorize ridgelines, feeding zones, bedding areas. They move off established trails intentionally, following game paths into dense cover. Because they have done so repeatedly without issue, they trust their internal map. But internal maps degrade under stress. If a hunter tracks wounded game into unfamiliar adjacent terrain late in the day, adrenaline may override caution. Dusk arrives faster than expected beneath canopy. Familiar landmarks may not appear in the anticipated sequence. Even a subtle navigational error at that stage can place them in a hollow that looks almost identical to another, but leads in the opposite direction. Experience does not eliminate fatigue. In fact, experienced hikers sometimes push themselves harder, assuming they can handle extended mileage. They may plan longer days, steeper climbs, more remote campsites. Extended exertion increases cumulative fatigue. Fatigue impairs decision-making regardless of prior experience. Medical events also ignore skill level. Cardiac events, sudden illness, dehydration-related confusion, these can strike anyone. In remote terrain, even a brief loss of consciousness can have severe consequences. An experienced hiker who collapses off trail may not be found easily if no one knows their exact route. Solo travel increases vulnerability. Many seasoned outdoors people prefer hiking alone. They value solitude and efficiency. Solo hiking is not inherently unsafe when done with preparation and communication, but it removes redundancy. If one person misjudges direction, there is no partner to question it. If one person is injured, there is no companion to seek help. Group dynamics, while sometimes introducing conflict, also provide multiple perspectives. Experience can also breed complacency in small ways. Perhaps the hiker chooses not to pack a full rain shell because the forecast looks clear. Perhaps they leave behind a satellite communicator because they have never needed one before. Perhaps they do not leave a detailed itinerary because they know the area well. Each of these decisions makes sense individually, but in combination, they reduce margin for error. There is another psychological layer here: identity. For someone who defines themselves as capable in wilderness, admitting uncertainty can feel uncomfortable. Turning back early may feel like overreaction. Activating an emergency signal may feel like failure. That hesitation can consume critical time. It is important to say clearly that experience remains one of the strongest protective factors in backcountry travel. Skilled individuals navigate difficult terrain successfully every day. They prevent countless potential incidents through good judgment. But experience is not immunity. The Appalachian wilderness is not a static environment. Trails shift, weather changes, leaf cover varies seasonally, streams rise and fall, blowdowns alter familiar routes. Returning to the same area year after year does not guarantee that it will behave identically. Consider the concept of microterrain again. A slight deviation around a blowdown might place an experienced hiker onto a spur that looks familiar, but is not the intended one. Because it resembles prior experience, they may follow it longer than a novice would, trusting instinct. Instinct is powerful but fallible. Memory also fades subtly over time. A hunter who remembers a distinctive rock formation may find that erosion or fallen trees have altered its appearance. A clearing may have filled in with saplings. A stream may have changed course slightly. The brain fills in missing pieces with expectation. In complex terrain like the Appalachians, those small inaccuracies can accumulate. There are also environmental factors that level experience advantage. Fog does not care how many miles someone has logged. Thick fog reduces visibility equally. Heavy rain saturates clothing regardless of resume. When visibility shrinks and temperature drops simultaneously, cognitive strain increases even for seasoned outdoors people. At night, without clear visual anchors, even those proficient in compass navigation must concentrate carefully. Fatigue combined with darkness erodes precision. Search and rescue analyses have shown that experienced individuals sometimes travel farther off intended route than novices. Why? Because novices are more likely to stop early when uncertain. Experienced hikers may attempt to self-correct longer before seeking help. That additional travel expands search area significantly. There is a paradox here. Experience teaches self-reliance. But in extreme cases, early reliance on external help can be life-saving. Personal locator beacons and satellite communicators have reduced fatalities in some scenarios, but their effectiveness depends on timely activation. An experienced hiker who believes they can reorient themselves without assistance may delay activating such a device until battery life is low or weather deteriorates. It is also worth acknowledging that some disappearances involving experienced individuals likely involve injury in difficult-to-detect terrain. A misstep near a concealed rock edge, a fall into a narrow ravine obscured by vegetation, a slide beneath dense laurel that hides body from aerial view. Experience reduces likelihood of misstep but does not eliminate it entirely. When examining these cases, it becomes clear that experience does not mean invulnerable. It means more prepared, more knowledgeable, but still human. The Appalachian wilderness does not challenge only the unprepared. It challenges perception. It challenges endurance. It challenges humility. Those who enter with respect and awareness often return safely. Those who enter with skill but underestimate subtle shifts may find themselves in situations that escalate quietly. Understanding that experience is a tool, not a guarantee, adds depth to the broader picture. Disappearance is not reserved for the reckless. It is rare. It is usually explainable in terms of terrain, weather, injury, and human cognition. But it does not require inexperience. The mountains have been here far longer than any individual. They have reshaped themselves countless times. They will continue to do so. Experience helps navigate them. It increases probability of safe return. But in rare instances, probability tilts the other way, and that is part of what makes the Appalachian wilderness both compelling and sobering. As we move forward, the question shifts again, not toward blaming skill level, but toward understanding how layers of small factors, even for the experienced, can converge unexpectedly beneath that endless canopy. When people hear that someone disappeared in the Appalachian wilderness, their minds often turn quickly to wildlife. It is an understandable reaction. The region is home to black bears, coyotes, bobcats, wild boar, snakes, and countless smaller creatures that move quietly through forest understory. The idea of an unseen animal encounter feels immediate and tangible. It provides a clear narrative. Something happened, something wild intervened. But the reality is more measured. Wildlife in the Appalachian Mountains is present, active, and integral to the ecosystem. Yet fatal attacks on humans in this region are extraordinarily rare. To understand how wildlife fits into the broader picture of disappearance, it helps to separate ecological fact from cultural imagination. Start with black bears. The American black bear is the largest land predator in the Appalachians. Populations are especially strong in places like Great Smoky Mountains National Park, where bear sightings are common. Bears are powerful animals capable of climbing, running, and navigating terrain with ease, but black bears are generally shy and avoid human contact. Most encounters involve a bear retreating once it detects a person. Food conditioning, where bears become accustomed to human food sources, can increase risk, but park management efforts focus heavily on preventing that through strict food storage regulations. Fatal black bear attacks in the Appalachian region are exceedingly rare across decades of documentation. Coyotes and bobcats are even less likely to pose direct threat. Coyotes are adaptable and widespread, but attacks on adult humans are almost non-existent. Bobcats are elusive and avoid confrontation. Venomous snakes, such as copperheads and timber rattlesnakes, inhabit certain sections of the Appalachians. Snake bites do occur, but fatalities are uncommon with modern medical treatment, especially if evacuation happens promptly. Wild boar present a more unpredictable variable in some areas, particularly in parts of the southern Appalachians. They are strong and can be aggressive if cornered. Yet documented cases of fatal boar attacks in these mountains are extremely limited. The point is not that wildlife poses zero risk. It is that statistically, wildlife is rarely the cause of disappearance. What wildlife does contribute to is post-incident complexity. If a person is injured and unable to move, wildlife activity can disturb the scene. Scavengers may scatter belongings. Remains may be dispersed over time. This complicates later discovery and forensic interpretation. But that is different from wildlife being the initiating cause. So why does wildlife loom so large in public imagination? Part of the answer lies in cultural storytelling. The Appalachian region has a deep tradition of folklore, stories of strange creatures in the woods, mysterious lights, and unexplained sounds are woven into local narratives. These stories often serve symbolic purposes, warnings against wandering alone, expressions of respect for the land, or reflections of historical hardship. One well-known piece of regional folklore involves creatures sometimes referred to as wild men, or other shadowy figures inhabiting remote hollows. Such tales vary by community and era. They are part of oral tradition, not documented biological reality. Similarly, mysterious noises in forest, branches snapping, distant calls, rustling in underbrush, can feel amplified at night. Without context, they invite interpretation. In reality, forest acoustics and nocturnal animal behaviour explain most of these experiences. Owls can produce calls that resemble human screams. Foxes emit sharp, unsettling vocalizations during mating season. Wind moving through dense canopy creates shifting tonal patterns that seem directional. Under stress, the human brain seeks meaning in ambiguous stimuli. A lost individual may interpret natural sounds as something more intentional. There is also a tendency to conflate disappearance with predation because predation provides closure. It suggests a definitive event. But the evidence in Appalachian cases rarely supports that conclusion. Search and rescue teams, when investigating disappearances, look carefully for signs of animal attack. Blood trails, disturbed ground patterns, claw marks, drag marks. Such signs are usually evident in predation events. In most unresolved cases, those indicators are absent. This does not diminish the emotional weight of the unknown. It simply grounds the conversation in ecological reality. Wildlife in the Appalachians operates according to natural rhythms. Bears forage for berries and nuts. Deer move along established paths. Coyotes hunt small mammals. These animals are not stalking hikers as primary prey. Misunderstandings arise partly from unfamiliarity. For individuals who did not grow up in forested environments, the idea of unseen animals nearby can feel inherently threatening. Yet millions of people hike these mountains annually without wildlife incident. That said, wildlife can contribute indirectly to risk. For example, someone who encounters a bear unexpectedly may react impulsively, running downhill rapidly, veering off trail in panic. That reaction, rather than the bear itself, could lead to disorientation or injury. Education mitigates that risk. Knowing how to respond calmly to wildlife sightings reduces panic-based decision-making. Similarly, fear of imagined wildlife may influence nighttime behaviour. A lost hiker might avoid staying still because of perceived animal threat, choosing instead to continue moving in darkness. Movement in darkness increases fall risk. Myth and misunderstanding in that sense shape behaviour. There are also historical instances of feral dogs in remote regions, particularly decades ago when abandoned hunting dogs formed loose packs. Such cases were isolated and are far less common today due to animal control efforts and changes in land use. The Appalachian ecosystem, though rich in species, is not a jungle filled with apex predators targeting humans. It is a temperate forest system where large mammals tend to avoid confrontation. The psychological effect of wildlife presence, however, remains significant. Knowing that bears inhabit the area may heighten vigilance. That vigilance can be protective, encouraging proper food storage and situational awareness. But if vigilance escalates into anxiety, it can narrow cognitive focus and contribute to poor navigation. In media coverage of disappearances, wildlife speculation often appears early. It provides a dramatic hook. Yet official statements from investigators typically emphasize environmental factors, terrain, weather, navigational error. Understanding wildlife accurately helps prevent misplaced fear. It also redirects attention to more statistically relevant risks. The Appalachian wilderness does not require extraordinary creatures to explain rare vanishings. The combination of dense terrain, weather variability, psychological stress, and delayed reporting accounts for most outcomes. Folklore remains part of regional identity. Stories passed down through generations reflect respect for the mountains and acknowledgement of their power. But conflating folklore with ecological reality can distract from practical safety lessons. The forest is not empty. It is alive with insects, birds, mammals, reptiles. It is dynamic and interconnected. Yet its wildlife is not the primary agent of disappearance. Misunderstanding that point can lead to both exaggerated fear and overlooked practical precautions. As we continue, the focus returns again to the subtle interplay between environment and human response. Because in the Appalachian wilderness, what is unseen is usually not predator or myth. It is terrain bending gently beyond the next ridge. It is a spur mistaken for a main path. It is fog settling into a hollow. And it is the quiet way small misunderstandings about animals, about sound, about direction can influence decisions when clarity matters most. There is a certain comfort in a long line drawn across a map. The Appalachian Trail stretches more than 2,000 miles from Georgia to Maine. It is marked, maintained, and walked by thousands every year. There are guidebooks, online forums, elevation profiles, water reports, shelters spaced at predictable intervals. It feels organised. It feels supervised. It feels, in a subtle way, safe. That feeling is what creates the illusion. The Appalachian Trail is one of the most remarkable long-distance hiking routes in the world. Volunteers maintain it carefully. Blazes mark its course. Shelters provide resting points. Trail towns offer resupply. For many hikers, especially those new to backcountry travel, the existence of such infrastructure suggests a managed corridor, something closer to a park path than a wilderness passage. But the Appalachian Trail is not a sidewalk through the woods. It is a narrow footpath that runs through some of the most remote terrain in the eastern United States. In many sections, stepping 10 yards off the tread places you in dense forest, indistinguishable from areas miles away. The illusion begins at trailheads. Parking areas are often well marked. Information boards describe distances and difficulty. There may be other hikers signing trail registers, adjusting packs, checking maps. The social atmosphere creates reassurance. You are not alone. Others have walked here recently. There are footprints. There are blazes. It is easy to assume that because the trail is popular, assistance is always close. In reality, long stretches of the trail pass through areas where cell service is unreliable or non-existent. In parts of Maine's 100-mile wilderness, road access is limited. In sections of Great Smoky Mountains National Park, terrain drops steeply into remote hollows only a short distance from the tread. The illusion intensifies for through hikers, those attempting the entire length in one season. By the time someone has walked hundreds of miles, the trail becomes familiar. The rhythm of walking, eating, sleeping, and repeating creates routine. Shelters appear roughly every 8 to 12 miles. Water sources are predictable. Other hikers form loose communities. Routine builds confidence. Confidence builds speed. Speed can build complacency. A through hiker who has navigated rocky Pennsylvania ridges and steep North Carolina climbs may begin to assume that all upcoming sections will present similar manageable challenges. That assumption may reduce caution in unfamiliar terrain. Side trails create another dimension of illusion. The Appalachian Trail intersects with countless spur trails leading to scenic overlooks, waterfalls, or connecting routes. These are often marked, but not always with the same clarity as the main tread. A hiker might leave the primary path briefly to visit a viewpoint. The spur is narrow but visible. After enjoying the overlook, they turn to return and find that the entry point back to the main trail blends into surrounding forest. The assumption that rejoining will be simple can delay careful retracing. There is also the green tunnel effect. In many sections, especially in the southern Appalachians, Dense vegetation forms a canopy overhead, and walls of foliage on either side. The trail becomes a corridor of green with limited peripheral vision. Walking through this corridor for miles creates a sensory rhythm. The tread beneath your feet is consistent. Blazes appear at intervals. Trees pass in steady succession. When that rhythm is interrupted, perhaps by a fallen tree requiring detour, the hiker must re-establish alignment consciously. If that re-establishment fails, the green tunnel illusion can dissolve into uniform forest quickly. Another factor is social proximity. On busy sections of the Appalachian Trail, hikers may see others regularly. The presence of fellow travellers reinforces the perception of shared space, but spacing varies. It is possible to hike for hours without encountering another person, especially in shoulder seasons or less trafficked stretches. If someone leaves the trail briefly in such a section, the window for unnoticed deviation can widen. There is also the psychological effect of established shelters. Lean-tos and campsites along the trail are predictable. A hiker may plan to reach a specific shelter by evening. If they are running behind schedule, they may push pace late in the day to make it there. Pushing pace increases fatigue. Fatigue reduces navigational precision. If they miss a subtle turn or fail to notice a blaze in fading light, the assumption that the shelter must be just ahead may encourage continued forward movement rather than immediate reassessment. Weather interacts with this illusion as well. In fog or heavy rain, blazes can be harder to spot. The trail tread may fill with water, creating multiple muddy paths as hikers detour around puddles. In such conditions, the assumption that "I'm on the AT, it's obvious" may override careful bearing checks. The Appalachian Trail is also intersected by logging roads, fire roads, and other footpaths. Some intersections are clearly signed. Others are less distinct. A wrong turn onto a logging road can feel plausible. The surface may even seem easier to walk. After a mile, when no blazes appear, doubt emerges. By that point, distance from the last confirmed location may already be significant. Technology reinforces the illusion of control. Many hikers carry smartphones with trail apps that show real-time location. These apps are useful tools, but they rely on battery life and signal availability. If a device fails unexpectedly, due to cold, water exposure, or simple depletion, the hiker who has grown accustomed to checking position digitally may feel a sudden loss of orientation confidence. Paper maps and compasses remain effective, but not everyone maintains proficiency in using them independently of digital cues. There is also a subtle cultural narrative around the Appalachian Trail. It is often described as a journey of personal growth, endurance, and transformation. Books and documentaries portray it as challenging but achievable, with determination. This narrative encourages people to attempt sections that may exceed their preparedness level. It does not cause disappearance, but it shapes expectations. Expectation influences decision-making. If the trail is perceived as fundamentally safe because so many complete it, individuals may underestimate the impact of stepping off it briefly. In truth, the Appalachian Trail is a narrow line through vast forest. Its maintenance is continuous and impressive. Volunteers clear blowdowns, repaint blazes, repair erosion damage. But that maintenance does not extend far beyond the tread. 10 yards into the woods, the environment returns to unmanaged density. In some disappearance cases, evidence suggests individuals left the main trail intentionally for short durations, a bathroom break, a photo opportunity, a shortcut to water. The assumption that re-entry would be immediate and obvious may have delayed marking or mindful orientation. The illusion is not that the Appalachian Trail is unsafe. It is that its presence can make surrounding wilderness feel less serious than it is. The trail gives structure, it provides direction, but it does not shrink the forest. If anything, its narrowness emphasizes how much remains untouched on either side. For most hikers, this structure works beautifully. They follow blazes, they camp at shelters, they resupply in towns, they complete journeys with stories and photos. For a small number, deviation from that structure even briefly changes trajectory. Understanding the Appalachian Trail illusion is about recalibrating perception. It is about recognizing that infrastructure does not equal containment, that popularity does not equal constant oversight, that maintenance does not eliminate natural variability. The forest beyond the blazes remains what it has always been: layered, dense, repetitive, shaped by weather and time. And the line that runs through it, however iconic, is still only a line. Step off it carelessly, and the illusion fades quickly. As we move further into this exploration, that theme continues to surface. Not danger in dramatic form, but quiet misalignment between expectation and environment, between the feeling of safety and the scale of wilderness that extends, uninterrupted, just beyond the edge of the tread. There is something quietly unsettling about this fact. If you place a person in a large, featureless environment and ask them to walk in a straight line without visual reference points, most will not. They will curve, sometimes gently, sometimes dramatically, but over distance they will arc into a loop. This has been tested in deserts, forests, and open fields. Participants instructed to maintain a straight bearing, without sun or landmark guidance, gradually veer to one side. The deviation is subtle at first, a degree or two off course, but over a mile that degree becomes distance. In the Appalachian wilderness, this tendency matters more than most people realize. The human brain is exceptionally good at navigating structured environments, roads, hallways, clear sight lines, but remove consistent visual anchors and orientation becomes fragile. Under dense Appalachian canopy, especially in summer, sky visibility is limited. The sun's position is often obscured. Distant peaks are hidden by trees. Valleys twist out of view behind ridgelines. Without strong reference points, the brain relies on internal cues. Those internal cues are imperfect. Humans are not symmetrical walkers. One leg is typically slightly stronger or longer than the other. Stride length varies subtly. Balance shifts. On flat ground, these differences are negligible. In uneven terrain, they compound. When someone becomes lost and attempts to just walk straight until I hit something, they're engaging in one of the least reliable navigation strategies available. They may believe they are maintaining a steady direction, but if they drift even slightly left over hundreds of steps, the path curves. In dense forest, that curve goes unnoticed. The Appalachians amplify this effect. Terrain is rarely flat. Slopes angle gradually in multiple directions. When descending a slope, gravity subtly pulls movement downhill along the path of least resistance. That path may not align with intended bearing. If a person attempts to hold a straight line across sloping ground without frequent compass checks, they tend to drift downhill. Combine this with the human tendency to avoid obstacles, stepping around fallen logs, pushing through thinner brush, and the line becomes less straight with every adjustment. These small course corrections feel insignificant. They are practical responses to terrain, but each one shifts orientation slightly. After an hour of movement through such terrain, a person may be facing a direction entirely different from what they believe. There is also the psychological component. When someone suspects they are lost, they often increase pace. Movement feels like progress. Stopping feels like surrender. But increased pace reduces attention to bearing. Under stress, cognitive bandwidth narrows. The brain prioritizes immediate obstacles rather than maintaining long-term directional consistency. A person focused on not tripping over roots may not notice they are veering steadily east instead of north. In open desert environments, studies have shown that people without visual cues often form large circular paths several miles in circumference. In Appalachian forest, the circles are smaller but more complex due to terrain interruptions. A hiker who believes they are moving toward a road may unknowingly loop back toward their starting point, but offset by several hundred yards. Because the forest looks uniform, they may not recognize that they are near an area previously traversed. Search and rescue teams sometimes observe this phenomenon in lost person cases. Evidence of movement patterns suggests repeated crossings of similar terrain, broken branches or footprints found in arcs rather than straight lines. The person was not wandering aimlessly, they believed they were walking decisively. Human spatial memory compounds the issue. Memory in dense forest lacks strong visual anchors. Trees look similar. Understory plants repeat. Without distinct features, the brain struggles to encode precise location. If someone turns around to retrace steps, the return path may look unfamiliar. Anxiety increases. They choose a direction that feels correct. Feeling is not reliable navigation. Under fatigue, the situation worsens. Dehydration and low blood sugar impair spatial reasoning. Working memory, responsible for holding and manipulating information such as the trail was on my left after the stream, degrades. The person may recall fragments, but not sequence. Nightfall accelerates disorientation. Without visual landmarks, movement becomes even less precise. A headlamp illuminates only a small circle ahead. Peripheral vision offers little guidance. In darkness, the human tendency to walk in circles intensifies dramatically. Some lost hikers report feeling as though the forest is shifting around them. In reality, it is their own orientation that is shifting unnoticed. The Appalachians add another layer of complexity through ridgelines. Imagine someone descending what they believe is the main ridge. The slope angles slightly left. They follow that slope. At the bottom, they encounter a stream and follow it downstream. Unbeknownst to them, the original ridge had a subtle fork near the top. They chose the left spur instead of the right. Now moving downhill reinforces the deviation. Because ridges in many parts of the Appalachians run roughly parallel, it is possible to move along an entirely different ridge system that feels correct based on general orientation. Without regular compass checks aligned to a map, this drift goes unnoticed. Humans also display a bias toward following linear features. If someone encounters a faint path, perhaps a deer trail, they may follow it under the assumption that it leads somewhere meaningful. Animal trails, however, are not designed for human navigation. They lead to feeding grounds, bedding areas, water sources that may not connect to roads. Following one can create looping patterns through habitat zones. There is also the subtle influence of dominant hand and vision. Studies suggest that individuals tend to veer in the direction of their dominant side when deprived of landmarks. A right-handed person may arc right more frequently, though the pattern is not universal. Over time, these small arcs accumulate. The mind resists accepting circular movement. If someone realizes they have returned to a previously visited area, they may feel frustration or panic. That emotional spike further degrades navigational discipline. Instead of stopping to analyze calmly, they may accelerate movement to break out of the loop. But acceleration without corrected bearing often produces a larger loop. This pattern can continue until fatigue forces rest. Search teams often instruct lost individuals through public safety messaging to stay put once they recognize they are disoriented. Remaining stationary reduces the risk of circular wandering. It concentrates search efforts, but remaining still contradicts instinct. Humans evolved as mobile problem solvers. Movement feels like control. The Appalachian wilderness, with its dense canopy and repetitive terrain, exposes the limits of that instinct. Compass use mitigates circular drift. Holding a bearing and checking it frequently, every few dozen steps in dense terrain, reduces deviation. But this requires deliberate slowing of pace and continuous attention. Under stress, such discipline is difficult to maintain. Technology can help. GPS devices provide direct bearing information, but as discussed earlier, batteries fail, signals drop, and over-reliance can erode manual skill. Walking in circles is not a dramatic phenomenon. It is quiet and gradual. There is no sudden realization that a loop has formed, only a creeping sense that the expected landmark has not appeared. By the time that realization arrives, distance from last known point may be substantial. In some disappearance cases, Analysis suggests that individuals remained within relatively small geographic areas for extended periods, moving in arcs rather than straight lines. Dense forest can conceal such movement easily. Understanding this human tendency reframes part of the mystery. The forest does not need to trap someone intentionally. The combination of terrain, vegetation, and subtle biomechanical asymmetry is sufficient. Most hikers never experience extreme circular wandering because they remain on marked trails with visual guidance. It is when someone leaves that structure, intentionally or accidentally, that the underlying human limitation surfaces. The Appalachian wilderness provides exactly the conditions required to expose it. Limited sightlines, repetitive features, sloped ground, obstacle-rich terrain. Under calm conditions with careful navigation, these factors are manageable. Under stress, fatigue, and shifting weather, they become magnified. And so, the act of walking forward, one of the most natural human behaviours, can quietly become the mechanism by which someone moves not towards safety, but around it. As we continue, the picture grows more layered. Terrain bends gently, trails fade, sound disappears, weather shifts, experience meets its limits, and within all of that, the human body keeps walking, trusting its sense of direction more than it should. There is a distinct shift that happens in the Appalachian wilderness when daylight begins to fade. It does not happen all at once. First, the forest grows slightly dimmer beneath the canopy. Colours flatten, greens become muted. The contrast between trail and surrounding ground softens. Shadows stretch across roots and rocks, altering their shape. Then, almost without warning, depth perception begins to fail. In open environments, sunset is gradual. The sky changes colour visibly. In dense Appalachian forest, especially in summer, the canopy absorbs much of that transition. By the time the sun dips below the ridgeline, usable light beneath the trees can drop quickly. If you're still on a well-marked trail with adequate headlamp and steady footing, night hiking is manageable. But if you're uncertain of your position, fatigued, or off-trail when darkness arrives, the entire situation changes. Vision is the dominant human sense for navigation. At night in the backcountry, that dominance collapses. A headlamp creates a narrow cone of illumination. Everything outside that cone fades into blackness. Peripheral awareness shrinks. Objects appear suddenly as you turn your head rather than gradually emerging from distance. In Appalachian terrain, where slopes can shift subtly and the forest floor is uneven, this reduction in visual field increases fall risk significantly. Routes that were obvious in daylight become low-contrast obstacles. Rocks cast exaggerated shadows that distort their true size. Small depressions in the ground disappear until your foot finds them unexpectedly. The body responds by slowing down. Slower movement is safer, but it consumes time and energy. If someone is attempting to reach a known point before full darkness, they may feel pressure to continue moving despite decreasing visibility. That pressure compounds fatigue. There is also the psychological impact of darkness in forest. During daylight, even dense woods feel expansive. You can see layers of trees fading into the distance. At night, the forest feels enclosed. Beyond the headlamp beam lies a wall of black. Sound becomes more prominent because visual input has diminished. Small nocturnal movements, an animal stepping through leaves, a branch shifting in wind can seem closer than they are. The human brain, wired for threat detection in low visibility, becomes more alert. Heart rate may rise slightly. Muscles tense. Breathing becomes more conscious. If someone is already uncertain of their location, this heightened state can tip toward anxiety. Anxiety narrows focus further. Instead of scanning terrain broadly, attention locks onto immediate ground. This reduces awareness of larger slope direction or subtle landmarks that might still be visible. Night also distorts spatial orientation. Without distant reference points, it becomes harder to judge whether you are ascending or descending gradually. Slopes feel flatter than they are, A gentle downhill may lead to a steeper drop without warning. If fog or mist accompanies nightfall, the effect intensifies. Moisture in the air reflects headlamp light back toward the eyes, reducing visibility even further. The beam illuminates suspended droplets, creating a bright haze that obscures terrain beyond a few feet. In some Appalachian regions, temperature drops quickly after sunset. Valleys cool faster than ridges. Cold air settles into hollows. If someone is at lower elevation, they may experience sharper temperature decline than expected. Cold affects dexterity. Fingers stiffen. Tasks like checking a compass, adjusting gear, or using a phone become more difficult. Battery life decreases in cold conditions as well. Headlamps dim faster. Phones shut down unexpectedly. If lighting fails completely, the situation becomes severe. Moving through dense forest in total darkness without artificial light is nearly impossible without injury risk. The instinct may be to sit and wait for dawn. In many cases, that is the safest decision. But waiting requires insulation and shelter. Without proper clothing or gear, prolonged exposure to cold night air can lead to hypothermia, even if daytime temperatures were comfortable. Another factor is time perception. Night stretches differently in wilderness. Without artificial light sources or visible clocks, hours feel elongated. A person sitting alone in darkness may feel as though dawn should arrive soon, when in reality many hours remain. Fatigue deepens during these hours. Sleep deprivation impairs judgment. If someone remains awake through the night in a state of anxiety, cognitive clarity the following morning may be reduced. Navigation errors made at first light can stem from decisions made under exhausted conditions. Search and rescue operations face their own constraints at night. Ground teams can continue searching with headlamps, but coverage slows. Aerial searches are often suspended unless conditions are exceptionally clear. Dogs can work at night, but terrain hazards increase for handlers. If a disappearance is reported late in the day, the first search window may coincide with darkness, limiting initial progress. Night also changes animal activity patterns. While most Appalachian wildlife avoids humans, nocturnal movement increases ambient sound. A person alone may interpret this as proximity to threat, even when it is routine behaviour. Fear-driven movement at night is particularly dangerous. If someone hears a noise and reacts by moving quickly downhill, they may not see a drop-off ahead. A fall into a concealed ravine or over a rock ledge is more likely in darkness. In daylight, terrain communicates its structure visually. At night, that communication is incomplete. There is also the effect of isolation amplified by darkness. During the day, even when alone, the environment feels active. Birds move, insects hum, light shifts. At night, long stretches of stillness can feel profound. If someone calls out and hears no response, silence carries weight. Psychological resilience is tested more severely at night than during daylight hours. Those with wilderness experience often prepare deliberately for nightfall. They set camp before dark, they secure food, they plan for limited visibility. But when night arrives unexpectedly, due to delayed navigation or miscalculated distance, preparation may be incomplete. A hiker who believed they were an hour from trailhead may find themselves 2 hours away when dusk falls. The decision becomes immediate: push on in low light or stop where they are. Both choices carry risk depending on conditions. In many Appalachian disappearances, timeline reconstruction suggests that nightfall marked a turning point. A missed junction late in the day, continued movement in fading light, increased disorientation as visibility dropped, a decision made under reduced sensory input. Night does not cause disappearance on its own. It reduces margin for correction. Errors that might have been noticed in daylight remain hidden until morning. Movement that felt straight in dusk may have curved subtly, and the forest, already dense and repetitive, becomes a landscape of shadow and limited depth. Most who spend nights in the Appalachian backcountry do so safely and even peacefully. With preparation, darkness becomes part of the rhythm. stars visible through breaks in canopy, cool air settling around camp. But when night intersects with uncertainty, fatigue, and terrain complexity, it alters the equation quickly. As we continue examining why some never return, nightfall emerges not as a dramatic villain, but as a multiplier. It amplifies existing problems, it narrows perception, it tests emotional stability. And in a landscape where small deviations matter, the difference between daylight and darkness can be the difference between correction and compounding error. The Appalachian Mountains are old enough to have outlived entire civilizations. Long before modern borders, before paved roads, before written records in this region, people moved through these ridges and valleys carrying stories. Some stories were practical, where water flows reliably, where game gathers in winter, which slopes are safest to climb. Others were cautionary, warnings passed from one generation to the next about places where something had gone wrong. When someone disappears in the Appalachian wilderness, the event rarely stays confined to official reports. It becomes part of a quieter archive. Not an archive written in files or databases, but one carried in memory. In small mountain communities, news travels through conversation more than headlines. A hunter who did not return, a hiker whose car sat at the trailhead too long, a search that lasted days and ended without closure. These events linger. Over time, details soften at the edges. The exact weather conditions may fade. The precise trail name may be forgotten. What remains is the shape of the story. Someone entered the woods and did not come back. These stories accumulate. They are not always dramatic. Often they are told simply. A reminder to let someone know where you're going. A quiet nod toward caution when someone mentions heading into a remote hollow alone. But as decades pass, some stories take on additional layers. Appalachian folklore has deep roots. It reflects isolation, hardship, resilience, and respect for the land. In a region historically marked by dispersed settlements and limited outside contact, oral tradition served as both entertainment and instruction. Many mountain stories center on warnings. Do not wander too far from known paths. Do not ignore changing weather. Do not travel alone at night without reason. Over time, those warnings sometimes adopt symbolic language. Strange lights glimpsed in valleys, unexplained calls echoing through hollows, figures seen between trees and then gone. These motifs appear across cultures worldwide, not just in Appalachia. They often arise in landscapes where visibility is limited and sound behaves unpredictably. The Appalachian terrain, with its layered ridges and dense forest, is fertile ground for such storytelling. Consider how sound carries in these mountains. A call from one ridge may bounce into another hollow. Wind through narrow gaps can produce tones that resemble distant voices. Wildlife calls at night can feel startlingly human. In daylight, these phenomena are easily contextualized. At night, especially for someone already uneasy, they can feel ambiguous. Stories form to fill ambiguity. It is important to distinguish between cultural narrative and physical explanation. The mountains do not generate myth on their own. Humans do. When disappearance lacks clear resolution, imagination steps in, not because people are irrational, but because unresolved events leave psychological space that seeks closure. In regions where generations have lived close to land, the line between cautionary tale and lived experience can blur gently. There are specific local legends scattered throughout the Appalachian range. Stories of spirits guarding certain ridges, warnings about wandering too deep into particular hollows, references to shadowy figures seen at the edge of campfire light. These legends vary widely by state and community. They are part of regional identity. But when examining documented disappearances, there is no credible evidence linking them to anything beyond environmental and human factors. What the mountains keep are not supernatural secrets. They keep terrain complexity. They keep dense vegetation. They keep the ability to conceal a person who has fallen into a ravine or beneath thick rhododendron. Over time, the forest reclaims physical evidence. Leaf litter accumulates season after season. New growth rises through disturbed soil. Fallen trees shift. Small animal burrows alter ground texture. A place where someone once walked becomes indistinguishable from surrounding ground within months. When remains are discovered years later in areas previously searched, it can feel inexplicable. How could they have been missed? But those who have worked in dense Appalachian terrain understand how easily visual detection fails. Search teams move in lines, scanning carefully. Yet even with methodical coverage, sightlines are limited. A body beneath thick brush or tucked into rock crevice may remain hidden. When such discoveries occur, they often bring partial closure, not because they answer every question, but because they anchor the story in physical reality. Still, for every case resolved, others remain open. In the absence of finality, stories evolve. The mountains keep those stories not because they generate them, but because they provide the backdrop against which they unfold. There's also a generational aspect to Appalachian storytelling. Elders pass down experiences to younger family members. Some stories are direct recollections of search efforts. Others are retellings shaped by time. A search that lasted 3 days becomes one that lasted a week. A foggy night becomes one filled with strange sounds. Memory adjusts subtly. This is not deception. It is human narrative behavior. In remote communities, shared stories reinforce collective identity. They remind listeners of the land's power and unpredictability. For hikers from outside the region, encountering these stories can be unsettling. They may interpret them as evidence of something extraordinary. But viewed through anthropological lens, they function as caution. The mountains are vast. The forest is dense. Respect is required. There is another dimension to the stories the mountains keep. Picked up faint scent and led teams to picked up faint scent and led teams to injured individuals. Those stories circulate too, though they receive less dramatic attention. They reinforce a different message, that preparation and community response matter. It is easy to focus on mystery. It is harder, but more accurate, to focus on patterns. The Appalachian wilderness has been walked for centuries. Millions of safe journeys outnumber rare disappearances by staggering margin. Yet the stories of those who did not return persist precisely because they are rare. They punctuate the larger narrative of safe passage. When people say the mountains keep secrets, what they often mean is that the terrain is capable of withholding answers, not intentionally, simply through density, growth, and time. The forest does not preserve events the way a building preserves a room. It absorbs them. A trail rerouted, a hollow filled with new saplings, a blowdown covering what once was visible. Stories remain because physical evidence fades. And in that fading, imagination sometimes grows. Understanding this dynamic helps ground the conversation. It allows space for cultural tradition without conflating it with physical cause. The mountains keep stories because people tell them. They keep terrain because geology shaped them. They keep silence because dense canopy absorbs sound. What they do not keep are hidden forces beyond explanation. As we continue, the focus shifts again toward the balance between narrative and reality. Because to understand why some never return, it is necessary to honour the stories without being guided solely by them. The answers, more often than not, lie not in legend, but in the layered interaction between human decision-making and a landscape that has remained patient and unchanged through every generation that has walked beneath its trees. There is a reason people are drawn to the Appalachian wilderness. It offers something that daily life often does not. Distance from noise, physical challenge, a sense of immersion in terrain that feels older and less structured than cities or highways. For many, stepping onto a forest trail is not about danger. It is about clarity. Adventure, at its core, is the pursuit of meaningful experience beyond routine. Risk, at its core, is exposure to potential harm. In the Appalachian Mountains, those two concepts often sit close together, not overlapping entirely, not identical, but close enough that the line between them can blur. Most hikers who enter these mountains do so responsibly. They check weather forecasts, they carry water, they wear appropriate footwear, they tell someone where they are going, and for the vast majority, the experience unfolds exactly as intended, challenging but manageable. The thin line appears when preparation, expectation, and environment misalign. Adventure often begins with confidence. A person reads trail descriptions, sees elevation profiles, studies photographs online. The route appears demanding but achievable. Perhaps they have completed similar hikes before. Perhaps friends have done it. Confidence builds momentum, but confidence can sometimes drift into assumption. Assumption that the forecast will remain accurate throughout the day. Assumption that the trail will be clearly marked. Assumption that fatigue will be manageable, is steep and continuous. A familiar path is steep and continuous. A familiar path may feel different after heavy rainfall has altered footing. The line between adventure and risk is often defined by margin. How much water is carried beyond minimum need? How much daylight remains relative to planned distance? How much experience matches the specific terrain ahead? Small reductions in margin may not matter on predictable ground. In remote sections of the Appalachian Range, they matter more. Consider timing. Setting out mid-morning for a hike expected to take 4 hours leaves limited buffer if pace slows. If the terrain proves more technical than anticipated, daylight may fade before return. Beginning earlier widens margin. Beginning later narrows it. Many incidents begin not with recklessness, but with slight underestimation. Underestimation of distance, of heat, of the cumulative effect of climbing and descending multiple ridges. Adventure encourages pushing boundaries slightly. That push is part of its appeal. But pushing boundaries requires honest self-assessment. Physical fitness varies. Acclimatization to humidity varies. Comfort navigating uneven terrain varies. The Appalachian Mountains are not extreme in altitude compared to western ranges, but their constant elevation changes demand sustained energy. Unlike a single large climb followed by descent, Appalachian hikes often involve repeated ascents and descents along ridgelines. Energy expenditure accumulates quietly. Fatigue affects not only muscles, but judgment. An adventurer may feel strong during the first half of a hike and less steady during the second. If terrain steepens unexpectedly near the end, coordination may decline. Slips happen more frequently late in the day. There is also the influence of group dynamics. Adventure shared with others can elevate mood and motivation, but groups sometimes move at uneven paces. One person may feel comfortable continuing while another grows uneasy. If concerns are not voiced clearly, the group may continue into narrowing margins. Turning around early is rarely dramatic. It does not make for compelling stories, yet it is often the decision that keeps adventure separate from risk. The cultural narrative around outdoor achievement sometimes emphasizes endurance over restraint, completing a difficult trail, reaching a summit despite obstacles, pushing through discomfort. These narratives inspire people to challenge themselves. They also subtly reward perseverance over caution. In the Appalachian context, where weather can shift and trails can narrow quickly, perseverance without recalibration can cross into risk. There is also the role of technology. GPS apps and digital maps provide reassurance. They suggest that location is always knowable, but signal loss, battery depletion, and device malfunction reduce that reassurance abruptly. If someone relies entirely on digital guidance without backup navigation skill, their margin shrinks. Adventure thrives on calculated exposure to uncertainty. Risk increases when uncertainty becomes unmanaged. For example, bushwhacking, leaving established trail intentionally to explore, is not inherently dangerous when done with clear orientation and adequate time. But bushwhacking late in the day, in unfamiliar terrain, without precise bearing discipline shifts the balance. The forest beyond the trail does not provide gentle reminders of direction. It offers uniformity. Uniformity increases navigational error. Another thin line exists in physical condition. Mild dehydration may feel like manageable discomfort, but dehydration reduces cognitive clarity. Reduced clarity affects navigation. Navigation errors increase exposure. The progression is incremental. Adventure also carries emotional energy. Excitement can narrow focus. Reaching a waterfall or overlook can create momentum to continue exploring beyond planned endpoint. In some cases, individuals venture just a little farther than intended. Just one more ridge, just one more bend in the stream. Often that extra distance is harmless. Occasionally it erodes the buffer needed for safe return. Weather again plays a central role. A forecast calling for scattered showers may feel negligible, but showers on steep leaf-covered slopes transform footing. Wind on exposed boulds increases chill factor. A temperature drop of 10 degrees combined with damp clothing may not seem significant until shivering begins. The thin line between adventure and risk is rarely visible at the moment it's crossed. It is visible in hindsight. In search and rescue debriefings, small decisions appear more significant than they felt in real time. Leaving the trail briefly without marking the entry point. Continuing past a junction without double-checking map alignment. Deciding to make up time by increasing pace on uneven ground. Each decision made sense individually. Collectively, they reduced margin. Margin is the quiet safeguard of wilderness travel. Extra water, extra daylight, extra caution at uncertain intersections. Adventure becomes risk when margin disappears without being noticed. The Appalachian wilderness does not demand fear. It demands awareness of that margin. Most who enter with balanced preparation experience only the adventure side of the line. They feel exertion, satisfaction, immersion in forest silence. They return home tired but intact. For the few who do not return, analysis often reveals that the line shifted gradually rather than suddenly. It may have begun with optimism about distance, continued with fatigue, narrowed further with weather shift or missed turn. None of those elements alone define risk. Together, they can. Understanding this balance is not about discouraging exploration. It is about recalibrating the internal scale. Adventure thrives when risk is acknowledged and managed. In the Appalachian Mountains, where terrain folds repeatedly and canopy limits view, that management requires humility. Not fear, not avoidance. Humility about time, about energy, about how quickly conditions change. The line remains thin. Crossing it does not require recklessness. Only a series of small underestimations layered quietly across a landscape that has little tolerance for them. And as we continue, that theme returns once more. Not mystery, not myth, but the steady narrowing of margin until the difference between a rewarding story and a search operation is measured not in miles, but in decisions made beneath the trees. There was a time when entering the Appalachian wilderness meant complete separation from the outside world. No live maps, no instant weather updates, no ability to send coordinates with the press of a button. Navigation depended on paper, compass, and memory. Communication depended on prearranged plans and trust that someone would notice if you did not return. Today, that separation feels less absolute. Smartphones carry detailed topographic maps. GPS units display real-time location. Satellite communicators allow hikers to send text messages from remote ridgelines. Personal locator beacons can summon search and rescue with precise coordinates. On the surface, technology appears to have closed the gap between wilderness and security. In many cases, it has. Countless rescues have occurred because someone activated a satellite SOS feature. Weather radar apps have alerted hikers to approaching storms. GPS tracks have helped search teams narrow focus areas quickly. And yet, disappearances still occur. The presence of technology does not eliminate vulnerability, it reshapes it. One of the most significant changes technology has introduced is perceived certainty. When a smartphone map displays a blue dot marking your position, it creates confidence. The dot moves as you move, trails appear clearly, distances calculate automatically, but GPS accuracy varies. Under dense Appalachian canopy, satellite signals can degrade. Valleys and ridgelines block portions of the sky, reducing signal triangulation accuracy. The blue dot may drift slightly off the actual trail. It may lag behind real movement. A small inaccuracy might not matter in open terrain. In forest, where multiple faint paths intersect, it can lead to wrong turns. Battery life is another constraint. Phones are designed primarily for urban or suburban use. Cold temperatures, common at higher elevations or during shoulder seasons, drain batteries faster. Continuous screen use, checking maps frequently, accelerates depletion. A hiker who relies exclusively on a phone for navigation may find themselves without power late in the day. External battery packs help, but they require planning and discipline. Water exposure presents additional risk. A sudden rainstorm can soak an unprotected device. Even water-resistant models can malfunction under sustained moisture. Satellite communicators and personal locator beacons add another layer of safety. Devices such as Garmin InReach units or standalone PLBs transmit distress signals via satellite networks. When activated, they send coordinates to emergency response centres, which then notify local authorities. These devices have saved lives, but they are not universal. Some hikers choose not to carry them due to cost, weight, or assumption that they are unnecessary on well-travelled trails. Others carry them but hesitate to activate them, fearing embarrassment or believing they can self-correct. Hesitation reduces effectiveness. Technology also influences route planning. Online platforms provide detailed trip reports, GPS tracks uploaded by previous hikers, and difficulty ratings. This information is valuable. It allows people to assess terrain before departure. However, relying on someone else's GPS track without understanding terrain can create false security. A downloaded route does not account for current trail conditions. It does not reflect blowdowns, reroutes, or seasonal closures. If a hiker follows a digital line without cross-referencing with physical markers and map comprehension, deviations may go unnoticed. There is also the phenomenon of cognitive offloading. When individuals rely heavily on digital navigation, they may pay less attention to environmental cues. The brain trusts the device to handle orientation. If the device fails suddenly, the transition back to manual navigation can be jarring. Without having actively observed slope direction, sun position, or trail features, the hiker may feel disoriented more quickly than someone who has been maintaining situational awareness throughout. Technology has also altered communication expectations. In earlier decades, if a hiker planned a 2-day trip, absence of contact for 48 hours was normal. Today, friends and family may expect periodic updates via text. This can be beneficial. Early reporting of missed check-ins speeds search response, but it can also create false reassurance. If someone sends a message mid-hike stating they are fine and then deviates later, the time between last known communication and concern may widen. Location sharing features allow real-time tracking in some apps. When enabled and functional, they provide search teams with precise last known coordinates, but coverage gaps remain in parts of the Appalachian range. Cell-based tracking fails where service drops. Even satellite-based tracking requires line of sight to sky, which dense canopy can partially obstruct. Drones and thermal imaging have enhanced search capabilities. Drones can access terrain difficult for ground teams. Thermal cameras detect heat signatures at night under certain conditions. However, canopy density limits aerial visibility. In summer months, thick leaf cover can block clear line of sight to ground. Technology also shapes risk perception. Because emergency rescue feels accessible at the push of a button, some individuals may undertake routes slightly beyond their preparedness level. This is not necessarily conscious recklessness. It is subtle recalibration of acceptable margin. If something goes wrong, help can be summoned, but rescue response time in remote Appalachian terrain is not instantaneous. Even with precise coordinates, ground teams must hike in. Helicopters may be grounded by weather. Night operations slow progress. The wilderness remains physically complex regardless of digital connection. There is another dimension: distraction. Phones offer music, podcasts, messaging, photography. While enriching experience for many, they also divide attention. A hiker focused on capturing a photo or reading a message may miss a blaze or subtle trail turn. Most of the time, this results in minor correction. Occasionally it leads to deviation. Yet technology is not inherently problematic. When integrated thoughtfully, with redundancy, with battery management, with backup paper maps, it dramatically increases safety margins. Experienced hikers often combine tools: GPS for real-time position, compass for bearing discipline, paper map for broader terrain context. They conserve battery, protect devices from moisture, and leave clear itineraries with contacts. The issue is not presence of technology, it is over-reliance without contingency. In many Appalachian disappearance cases, investigators consider whether devices were carried and whether signals were received. Sometimes phones are found with drained batteries. Sometimes GPS tracks reveal partial movement before stopping abruptly. In other cases, no devices were present at all. Technology changes the landscape of possibility, but does not eliminate fundamental realities. Terrain still folds unpredictably. Weather still shifts. Darkness still reduces visibility. Human cognition still degrades under fatigue. Digital tools can mitigate these factors, but not override them. There is a subtle irony in modern wilderness travel. People seek disconnection from constant digital engagement. They enter the Appalachian forest precisely to escape screens and notifications. Yet the same devices offer safety nets. Balancing that desire for immersion with practical safety planning is part of navigating the thin line discussed earlier. Technology in the wild is neither savior nor villain. It is a tool layered onto ancient terrain. When used wisely, it widens margin. When assumed infallible, it narrows it. The Appalachian wilderness predates satellites, smartphones, and GPS networks by millions of years. It will continue unchanged long after current devices become obsolete. Understanding that perspective recalibrates expectations. Technology enhances survival probability. It does not guarantee outcome. And as we approach the final layers of this exploration, it becomes clear that no single factor, terrain, weather, psychology, wildlife, or technology, acts alone. They intersect, sometimes smoothly, sometimes at precisely the wrong moment. When a search ends without resolution, the question lingers long after teams leave the trailhead. How can someone vanish in a region so heavily visited? The Appalachian Mountains are not an empty wilderness. Millions hike sections of the Appalachian Trail each year. Parks such as Great Smoky Mountains National Park record staggering visitor numbers annually. Trailheads are photographed, shelters logged, summit views shared online, and yet, in rare cases, someone enters the forest and is not found. The answer is less dramatic than people expect. It begins with scale. Even heavily visited sections of the Appalachian Range are surrounded by vast tracts of forest. Step off a narrow trail corridor, and you enter terrain that may see little foot traffic beyond wildlife and occasional hunters. Dense rhododendron thickets form natural walls. Ravines cut sharply into slopes. Fallen trees create layered obstacles. Search teams operate methodically. They sweep grids. They deploy dogs. They examine likely travel corridors. But even organised searchers cannot examine every square foot of forest. Visibility in dense Appalachian terrain can shrink to mere yards. A person lying beneath laurel branches or fallen logs may not be visible from 10 feet away. Leaf litter compounds concealment. Each autumn, a fresh layer of leaves covers the forest floor. Over weeks and months those leaves compact. Rains press them downward. Soil shifts. What was once visible becomes muted. If a person falls into a narrow crevice between rocks or slides beneath a tangle of blowdowns, detection becomes even harder. Time works with the landscape. Vegetation grows. Vines spread. Young saplings rise in disturbed soil. Within a single growing season, a previously open patch may fill with dense green. Searches conducted shortly after disappearance are most effective, but even then, terrain complexity limits thoroughness. Then, there is verticality. Appalachian slopes are not sheer cliffs in most places, but they are steep and irregular. A fall down a leaf-covered incline can carry someone farther than expected. If they come to rest below a rock ledge or within a narrow gully, they may not be visible from above. Helicopters equipped with thermal imaging can assist under certain conditions, but thick canopy blocks line of sight to ground. In summer months, leaves form a nearly continuous cover. In winter, visibility improves somewhat with leaf-off conditions, yet snow introduces its own concealment and weather limitations. Distance also deceives. Search radii are calculated based on average movement patterns, but individuals under stress sometimes move unpredictably. Panic walking, as discussed earlier, can expand search area quickly. If someone continues travelling for hours before realising severity of their situation, the search grid widens exponentially. Every additional mile in dense forest multiplies potential hiding places. Waterways present another factor. Streams and rivers cut through valleys. In heavy rain, water levels rise quickly. If someone attempts to cross and is swept downstream, recovery may occur far from original search zone. Rivers carry debris and sediment. Items can be dispersed or buried. In some cases, personal belongings are discovered months later along banks, suggesting movement by water. There is also the role of misidentified last known points. Search operations rely heavily on accurate information about where someone was last seen. If that location is incorrect by even a mile, search focus shifts accordingly. A hiker believed to have started on one trail may have chosen another spur without informing anyone. A hunter may have altered route at last minute. A solo camper may have parked at one trailhead but entered forest from a secondary access point. Small inaccuracies in initial data ripple outward. Another uncomfortable truth is that not all disappearances are purely environmental. Though rare, foul play cannot be dismissed categorically in every case. Remote trailheads, isolated roads, and dispersed campsites create opportunity for criminal activity, even if such incidents are statistically uncommon in the Appalachian region. Law enforcement investigations consider this possibility when evidence suggests human interference. But in the majority of unresolved wilderness cases, environmental factors dominate. There is also a statistical reality. The number of people who hike the Appalachian region annually is enormous. Even a tiny fraction encountering serious misfortune translates into real cases. When viewed proportionally, disappearance remains rare. Emotionally, however, rarity does not diminish impact. For families, the absence of closure can be more difficult than confirmed loss. Not knowing what happened leaves space for endless possibility. From a terrain perspective, the forest does not preserve narratives. It absorbs events. Search teams sometimes revisit areas years later based on new information. Remains have been discovered in zones previously searched thoroughly. This does not indicate negligence. It reflects how easily dense vegetation conceals. In some instances, remains are found surprisingly close to established trails, within a few hundred yards, sometimes within sight distance obscured by brush. This proximity fuels public confusion. How could someone be so close and not be found? The answer lies in visibility limitations. From a trail, your line of sight extends perhaps 30 or 40 feet into dense forest. Beyond that, overlapping trunks, branches, and undergrowth block view. A person lying motionless beneath foliage may blend entirely with surroundings. Clothing colour matters. Bright gear improves detection probability. Neutral earth tones, while aesthetically pleasing, reduce contrast against leaf litter and bark. Over time, fabric fades, materials degrade. Wildlife activity can scatter belongings subtly, not in dramatic fashion, but enough to obscure pattern. The concept of never found also deserves careful framing. In some cases, remains may exist within search zones but remain undiscovered due to density. In others, natural processes, erosion, water movement, may relocate or conceal evidence. And in rare cases, individuals may have left the wilderness intentionally, for reasons unrelated to accident, though such scenarios represent a small subset. When discussing why some are never found, it's important to avoid assuming extraordinary explanations. The Appalachian wilderness does not need mystery to account for concealment. It requires only scale, vegetation, terrain complexity, and time. Search and rescue professionals understand this deeply. They know that missing persons are often closer than assumed, yet still hidden effectively. They also know that probability diminishes as days pass without sign. The forest's ability to absorb evidence is not malicious. It is mechanical. Leaves fall, water flows, plants grow. Human presence is transient in comparison. Understanding this does not remove emotional weight, it grounds it. It shifts the question from what unimaginable force removed them to how did terrain, time, and small decisions converge. Most who step into these mountains step back out. For the few who do not, the reasons are rarely spectacular. They are layered: a misstep, a slope, a missed turn, a delayed report, a stretch of forest just dense enough to hide, and the longer time passes, the more complete that concealment becomes. As we move toward the final reflection, the focus is no longer on individual factors. It is on the relationship between human expectation and a landscape that has remained patient through centuries of footsteps. Because in the end, the forest does not announce what it keeps, it simply continues growing. Stand at the edge of an Appalachian trail at dawn, and nothing about the forest suggests disappearance. Mist lifts slowly from the valley. Light filters through branches in thin, angled beams. Birds move between trees with ordinary purpose. The ground is layered in leaves that fell long before you arrived and will fall long after you leave. There is no visible trace of past events. The forest does not display memory the way cities do. There are no plaques marking every misstep. No permanent outlines where someone once stood uncertain. No preserved footprints beneath glass. What remains is continuity. The Appalachian Mountains are among the oldest mountain systems on Earth. They have risen and eroded for hundreds of millions of years. Oceans once covered them. Glaciers shaped portions of their northern reaches. Entire ecosystems have come and gone across geological time. Human presence is recent by comparison. Indigenous communities lived here for thousands of years. Settlers carved farms into narrow hollows. Logging companies stripped slopes and then moved on. National parks were established. Trails were blazed. Millions of hikers followed. Through all of it, the forest persisted. Trees fell and regrew. Streams shifted course gradually. Leaf litter accumulated in patient cycles. When someone disappears, the event feels singular and enormous to those connected to it. To the forest, it is an interruption no different from a storm or fallen branch. This is not indifference in a moral sense. It is ecological continuity. The forest remains because it is not shaped by human timelines. Search teams may arrive in force, helicopters circle, volunteers comb through thickets. For days, the landscape fills with urgency. Then, when operations conclude, the forest returns to its baseline rhythm. Wind through canopy, insects in undergrowth, deer moving at dusk. That contrast can feel stark. For families, time divides into before and after. For the forest, time moves evenly. Understanding this difference changes perspective. Disappearance in the Appalachian wilderness is not a contest between human and environment. It is an intersection of scale. Human bodies are fragile. Human perception is limited. Human endurance fluctuates. The forest is layered, repetitive, and persistent. Most who enter it do so safely. They experience challenge, exertion, satisfaction. They navigate ridges and return to trailheads with stories to tell. The rare cases where someone does not return do not transform the forest into something hostile. They highlight the boundaries of control. Throughout this exploration, patterns have emerged. Terrain that folds gently but repeatedly, trails that shift subtly, weather that pivots without spectacle, sound that absorbs rather than carries, minds that narrow under stress, technology that helps but does not guarantee. None of these elements alone explain every case. Together they describe a system. The Appalachian wilderness is not dramatic in the way high alpine ranges can be. It does not tower in sharp relief against the sky. It rolls. That rolling landscape creates repetition. Repetition creates visual uniformity. Uniformity creates navigational vulnerability. And time, layered over all of it, completes the equation. When people ask why some never return, they often expect a single cause. A hidden predator, a secret place, an extraordinary anomaly. But the forest does not operate through singular events. It operates through accumulation. A missed turn combined with fading light. A slight injury combined with rain. A decision to press forward combined with fatigue. Each factor modest, together consequential. The forest remains because it does not need to act dramatically. It simply continues. For those who hike with preparation and humility, that continuity is part of the appeal. The knowledge that these ridges existed long before and will exist long after lends perspective. Adventure in such a landscape becomes less about conquering terrain and more about moving through it responsibly, respecting margin, monitoring weather, carrying redundancy, communicating plans clearly. The goal is not fear, it is calibration. To understand that beauty and risk share space here, to recognise that infrastructure, trails, blazes, shelters are thin lines across a vast system. To remember that stepping off those lines requires skill and caution equal to the environment's complexity. The Appalachian wilderness does not keep secrets in a deliberate way. It keeps continuity. It absorbs what falls into it and continues growing. When search efforts conclude and headlines fade, the forest does not mark the absence. It does not alter its pattern. Morning light returns, fog gathers in hollows, leaves fall again in autumn, and hikers step once more onto narrow treads, drawn by the same quiet pull that has guided people into these mountains for centuries. Most will return home carrying stories of endurance and stillness. A few will not. Not because the forest is malevolent, not because it is mythical, but because it is vast enough, layered enough, and patient enough to expose the limits of human certainty. In the end, the forest remains what it has always been, ancient, dense, indifferent to human urgency. And those who enter it carry with them both the privilege of walking beneath its canopy and the responsibility of understanding how thin the line can be between a journey completed and one that quietly dissolves into the trees.